The poor intern was humiliated, until a man arrived in a Porsche and said, "I'm here for her." The silence in conference room B was the kind that preceded earthquake. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood at the foot of the mahogany table, her worn scrubs a jarring contrast to the pristine white coats surrounding her, as 12 pairs of eyes dissected her like a specimen under glass. The morning light filtering through the hospital's floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to deliberately avoid her corner, leaving her in shadow while illuminating the polished faces of the Presbyterian Medical Center's elite. "Your differential diagnosis, Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Richard Blackwell's voice cut through the air with surgical precision. He didn't look up from the chart, his silver pen tapping against the leather portfolio with the rhythm of a countdown timer. "The 73-year-old male presents with chest pain, elevated troponins, and..." His pale blue eyes finally lifted, finding hers across the table. "Well, we're waiting." Sarah's throat constricted. She knew the answer, had known it the moment she'd reviewed the case at 4:30 that morning in the hospital's dimly lit library, surrounded by coffee-stained medical journals and the lingering smell of industrial disinfectant. But here, under Blackwell's glacier-cold stare and the weight of institutional hierarchy, her voice seemed to have abandoned her entirely. 27 years old and already an expert at becoming invisible, Sarah had mastered the art of surviving in spaces that weren't designed for someone like her. Someone whose mother had cleaned these very floors on night shifts, whose medical school acceptance letter had been read by candlelight during a power outage, whose scrubs were hand-me-downs from a third-year resident who'd taken pity on the scholarship girl. The Presbyterian Medical Center's internal medicine program was prestigious enough that her mother, Elena Mitchell, would have wept with pride to know her daughter walked these halls as a doctor in training. Elena, who died of cervical cancer during Sarah's first year of medical school because she'd waited too long to seek treatment, not from ignorance, but from the crushing weight of knowing she couldn't afford to miss work, couldn't afford the co-pays, couldn't afford to be sick in a world that had never shown mercy to people who cleaned up after others. "Dr. Mitchell." Blackwell's voice had dropped to that particular register reserved for professional disappointment. "Perhaps you'd prefer to review the basics of cardiology during your own time, rather than ours." The words hit her like a slap across the face. Around the table, the other residents, Dr. Hamilton with his father's medical practice waiting for him, Dr. Rhodes whose family had donated the hospital's East Wing, Dr. Chen whose Ivy League confidence seemed to shimmer around her like armor. They all looked away with the practiced ease of those who'd never been singled out for anything other than excellence. "Unstable angina," Sarah finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the ventilation system. "Given the presentation and the troponin elevation pattern, I'd recommend immediate cardiology consultation and serial ECGs to monitor for STEMI conversion." Blackwell's pen stopped tapping. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance that her answer was flawless despite her obvious discomfort. "Adequate," he said finally, the word dropping like a stone into still water. He turned to Dr. Hamilton. "And your assessment of the management plan?" As Hamilton launched into his response, the same response Sarah had given, but delivered with the confident swagger that came from never doubting your right to be in the room, Sarah felt the familiar burn of invisibility settling over her shoulders like a shroud. She was 27 years old, brilliant enough to have graduated in the top 10% of her medical school class despite working 3 jobs throughout, and skilled enough that her attending physicians consistently praised her clinical reasoning in their private note. But in rooms like this, surrounded by the medicine's hereditary aristocracy, she might as well have been carrying a mop instead of a stethoscope. The rounds continued with the mechanical precision of a Swiss timepiece. Patient after patient, differential diagnoses delivered with varying degrees of confidence and accuracy, Blackwell's approval dispensed like communion wine, precious drops for the worthy, nothing but silence for the rest. Sarah retreated further into herself with each passing case, her contributions becoming whispers, then nods, then nothing at all. It was during the discussion of bed assignments that her pager buzzed against her hip, a sharp, urgent vibration that seemed to cut through the conference room's rarefied air like a fire alarm. Sarah glanced down at the display. Peds Oncology Urgent, new admit. Her breath caught in her throat. Pediatric oncology admissions were handled by specialized teams, not second-year internal medicine residents. There had to be some mistake, some crossed wire in the hospital's complex communication system. But as she stared at the message, her mind began to race through the possibilities. Emergency consultation, backup coverage, or worse. Dr. Mitchell. Blackwell's voice sliced through her thoughts like a scalpel through skin. I trust whatever message you've received isn't more important than our discussion of Mrs. Patterson's anticoagulation regimen. Sarah's face burned with embarrassment as every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her. I'm sorry, Dr. Blackwell. I was just distracted. He finished for her, his tone suggesting that distraction was perhaps the gravest sin a physician could commit. Perhaps you'd benefit from a reminder about the importance of focus during patient care discussions. Before Sarah could respond, her pager buzzed again. Then again. The urgency of the repeated alerts sent ice water through her veins, because in her 2 years at Presbyterian Medical Center, she had learned that when the hospital's communication system became insistent, it usually meant someone was dying. And as she looked up from the pager's glowing display to find Blackwell's eyes boring into hers with the cold fury of a man whose authority had been challenged by modern technology itself, Sarah realized that her careful invisibility was about to be shattered in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Because the third message hadn't been a repeat. It had been an update. 6-year-old female, acute leukemia, mother requesting Spanish translator, NO family support, request Dr. Mitchell by name. The final line made Sarah's blood run cold, because she had never worked in pediatric oncology, had never been requested by name for anything, and had absolutely no idea how a dying child's mother could possibly know who she was. The elevator ride to the 6th floor felt like descending into another world. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she pressed the button for pediatric oncology, her mind racing through possibilities that all led to the same terrifying conclusion. Somehow, she was about to meet a dying child who knew her name. The doors opened with a soft chime that seemed obscenely cheerful given the circumstances. The pediatric oncology wing at Presbyterian Medical Center was designed to feel less like a hospital and more like a children's museum. Bright murals covered the walls, soft music played from hidden speakers, and the lighting was warm rather than the harsh fluorescent glare of the adult ward. But Sarah had learned during medical school that no amount of cheerful decoration could mask the underlying reality of this place. Children came here to fight for their lives, and not all of them won. Dr. Patricia Ramos, the pediatric oncology attending, met Sarah at the nurse's station with the kind of expression that experienced physicians wore when delivering bad news to medical students. Dr. Mitchell, thank you for coming up. I know this is unusual. The page said she asked for me by name, Sarah interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand how that's possible. I've never worked in pediatrics. Dr. Ramos glanced toward the closed door of room 612, then back to Sarah with eyes that held the weight of too many difficult conversations. The child's name is Lily Chen. She's 6 years old, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and she was admitted 3 hours ago through emergency. Her mother, Maria, is a single parent, works as a night shift cleaner at downtown office buildings. She specifically asked for the lady doctor, whose mama cleaned hospitals too. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her mother's face flashed before her eyes. Elena Mitchell at 38, exhausted after 12-hour shifts, her hands raw from industrial cleaning chemicals, but still insisting on helping Sarah with her homework at the kitchen table of their one-bedroom apartment. Elena, who had sacrificed everything so her daughter could have the education she'd never been able to afford herself. I don't understand, Sarah whispered, but even as she said it, pieces began falling into place. Maria Chen. She'd heard that name before, spoken in hushed conversations between her mother and the other cleaning women, who sometimes gathered in their apartment for coffee and gossip about which hospital supervisors treated them with dignity and which ones acted as though they were invisible. Dr. Ramos touched Sarah's arm gently. Maria said your mother was kind to her when she first started working the hospital circuit. Helped her understand which floors to clean first, which doctors to avoid after difficult cases, things like that. When she heard there was a Dr. Mitchell working here, she paused, studying Sarah's face. She thought it might be Elena's daughter. She was right. Sarah's throat constricted. Her mother had been dead for 8 years, but her legacy was still reaching across time to connect with people Sarah had never met. How is Lily? The little girl? Come see for yourself, Dr. Ramos said quietly, leading Sarah toward room 612. But I should warn you, Maria is terrified. This is her first time dealing with anything like this, and the diagnosis was abrupt. Lily had been complaining of fatigue for weeks, but Maria couldn't afford to miss work for doctor visits until Lily collapsed at school this morning. As they approached the room, Sarah could hear soft murmuring in Spanish through the partially open door. Her heart clenched as she recognized the tone, the desperate prayers of a mother who had discovered that love alone couldn't protect her child from the indiscriminate cruelty of disease. Dr. Ramos knocked gently and pushed the door open. Maria? I've brought Dr. Mitchell. The woman who looked up from beside the hospital bed was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps 35, with prematurely gray streaks in her dark hair and the kind of deep exhaustion that came not from sleepless nights but from sleepless years. Her clothes were clean but worn, and her hands, Sarah noticed immediately, bore the same telltale signs of chemical burns and constant scrubbing that her mother's hands had carried. But it was the child in the bed who made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Lily Chen was tiny for 6 years old, her skin pale with the particular translucency that came with severe anemia. But her dark eyes were bright with intelligence and curiosity, and when she saw Sarah, she smiled with the kind of pure joy that children somehow maintained even in the face of incomprehensible circumstances. Mama, Lily whispered in accented English, is this Elena's daughter? The one you told me about? Maria's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Sarah. See Mija. This is Dr. Sarah. Elena's little girl, all grown up and helping sick children now. She turned to Sarah with an expression of desperate hope. I'm sorry to ask for you like this. I know you must be very busy. But when they told me Lily has cancer, her voice broke on the word. I remembered Elena talking about her brilliant daughter who was going to be a doctor. I thought maybe you could help me understand what they want to do to my baby. Sarah moved closer to the bed, her medical training taking over even as her heart shattered for this family. Hello, Lily, she said softly, crouching down so she was at eye level with the child. I'm Dr. Sarah. Your mama is right. My mama and your mama were friends. Lily's smile widened. Mama says your mama was an angel who made the hospital beautiful for sick people. Are you an angel, doctor? The innocent question hit Sarah like a sledgehammer to the chest. She glanced at Maria, who was watching this interaction with the desperate hope of someone clutching at a lifeline, then back at Lily's trusting face. I'm just a doctor, sweetheart, Sarah said gently, but something in her chest shifted as she said it. For the first time in months, she felt like more than just the invisible intern who couldn't afford to belong. She felt like Elena Mitchell's daughter, and that had always been enough. Sarah turned to Dr. Ramos. What's the treatment plan? Standard protocol for all, induction chemotherapy starting tomorrow, followed by consolidation and maintenance phases. The prognosis is actually quite good if we can achieve remission, but Dr. Ramos glanced meaningfully at Maria. There are financial considerations. The insurance coverage is limited, and the family has already indicated they may have difficulty with co-pays for the extended treatment protocol. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd seen this scenario before. Families forced to choose between financial ruin and their child's life. Brilliant medical innovations rendered useless by insurance algorithms and bureaucratic indifference. How long is the complete treatment timeline? She asked, though she already knew the answer. 24 to 36 months if everything goes according to plan. Maria made a small, choked sound. They said it could cost more than I make in 5 years. Even with insurance. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, hearing her mother's voice across the years. Mija, sometimes the most important thing a doctor can do isn't cure a disease. Sometimes it's just make sure nobody faces it alone. When she opened her eyes, she found Lily watching her with the kind of ancient wisdom that serious illness sometimes brought to children. "Dr. Sarah," the little girl whispered, "are you going to help take care of me?" Sarah reached out and gently took Lily's small hand in hers. "Yes," she said quietly, and realized she meant it completely, even though she had absolutely no idea how she was going to make that promise possible. "I'm going to help take care of you." But as she spoke the words, her pager buzzed again. This time with a message that made her blood run cold. "Dr. Blackwell requests your immediate presence in his office. Unauthorized patient consultation." Sarah looked up to find Dr. Ramos watching her with concern. "Someone reported that you left rounds without permission," the attending said quietly. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I shouldn't have called you up here without clearing it with internal medicine first." As Sarah stared down at Lily's trusting face, then at Maria's desperate hope, she realized that keeping her promise to this family might cost her everything she'd worked so hard to achieve. Because Dr. Richard Blackwell didn't tolerate unauthorized compassion, and she was about to find out exactly how much he was willing to make her pay for caring too much about people who didn't matter to the hospital's bottom line. The walk back to the internal medicine wing felt like a funeral procession. Sarah's footsteps echoed off the polished linoleum floors as she made her way toward Dr. Blackwell's office, each step bringing her closer to what felt like professional execution. The hallways that had seemed imposing that morning now felt positively menacing, as though the very walls were conspiring to remind her of her place in the hospital hierarchy. Dr. Blackwell's office occupied a corner suite on the 8th floor, with windows that offered a commanding view of the city skyline and furnishings that spoke of old money and older power. Sarah had been inside exactly 3 times during her residency, twice for routine evaluations that had left her feeling like a specimen under a microscope, and once to receive what Blackwell had euphemistically called guidance about her tendency toward excessive emotional investment in patient outcomes. She knocked on the heavy wooden door and waited for the crisp "enter" before stepping inside. Blackwell sat behind his mahogany desk like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. He didn't look up from the files spread before him as Sarah approached, and the silence stretched out until it became another form of punishment. When he finally raised his eyes, his expression held the kind of cold disappointment that Sarah had learned to fear more than anger. "Dr. Mitchell," he began, his voice carrying the precise articulation of someone who had never been interrupted, never been challenged, never been anything other than absolutely certain of his own authority. "I've just received a rather interesting call from Dr. Ramos in pediatric oncology." Sarah remained standing, though she hadn't been invited to sit. In Blackwell's office, comfort was earned, not granted. "Sir, I was responding to a page, without permission, without consultation, without regard for the fact that you are currently assigned to internal medicine rounds, which you abandoned in the middle of patient case discussions." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep and leave scars. "Perhaps you could enlighten me as to why you believe the rules that govern every other resident in this program somehow don't apply to you." The unfairness of it made Sarah's chest tight with suppressed anger. She had responded to an urgent page from another department, something any responsible physician would do. But in Blackwell's universe, responsible medicine apparently included asking permission before potentially saving a life. "The child specifically requested me by name," Sarah said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. Her mother knew my mother, and I felt, you felt. Blackwell's repetition of the word made it sound obscene. Dr. Mitchell, I'm beginning to suspect that your problem isn't incompetence. It's the dangerous delusion that medicine is about feelings rather than protocols, compassion rather than competence, personal connections rather than professional judgment. Sarah bit back the response that rose in her throat, that her mother had taught her that medicine was exactly about those things, that healing required both technical skill and human connection, that the protocols Blackwell worshipped had been created to serve patients, not the other way around. I apologize for leaving rounds without permission, she said instead, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It won't happen again. Blackwell studied her for a long moment, his pale eyes cataloging every sign of discomfort with the satisfaction of a predator who had cornered his prey. No, Dr. Mitchell, I don't believe it will. Because as of this moment, you are reassigned from patient care duties to research observation. You'll spend the next 2 weeks reviewing case studies in the medical library and preparing presentations for the department's educational seminars. No direct patient contact. No unauthorized consultations. No opportunities for your emotional instincts to interfere with actual medical practice. The punishment hit Sarah like a physical blow. Research observation was the academic equivalent of solitary confinement, a way of benching residents who had fallen out of favor without formally reprimanding them. She would spend her days buried in dusty journals and statistical analyses, while her peers gained crucial hands-on experience with real patients facing real crises. Sir, she began, desperation creeping into her voice despite her best efforts, I understand your concerns, but I've been working with Mr. Patterson's anticoagulation protocol, and Mrs. Henderson's diabetes management still needs. Will be handled by residents who understand the meaning of professional boundaries, Blackwell interrupted. Dr. Rhodes will assume your current caseload. I'm sure she'll manage admirably without the emotional complications that seem to plague your clinical judgment. Sarah felt something crumble inside her chest. Dr. Catherine Rhodes was brilliant, ambitious, and possessed of the kind of clinical detachment that Blackwell prized above all other virtues. She would handle Sarah's patients with perfect protocol compliance and zero personal investment in their outcomes. It was exactly what Blackwell wanted, and exactly what made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. What about Lily Chen? Sarah asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. The little girl in pediatric oncology? Blackwell's smile was thin and sharp as a scalpel blade. Is not your patient, never was your patient, and will never be your patient. Dr. Mitchell, let me be absolutely clear about something. Your mother may have been a valued member of this hospital's support staff, but that doesn't entitle you to special consideration or exemption from professional standards. If anything, it should motivate you to prove that you belong here through excellence, not through emotional appeals and boundary violations. The casual mention of her mother, the reduction of Elena Mitchell to a valued member of support staff, sent a flash of pure rage through Sarah's veins. But she forced herself to remain silent, because she had learned during her 2 years at Presbyterian Medical Center that anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. I understand, she said quietly, though understanding and accepting were very different things. I certainly hope you do, Blackwell replied, already turning his attention back to the files on his desk. Your first research assignment is a comprehensive review of professional boundaries in physician-patient relationship. I expect a 15-page analysis on my desk by Friday morning. You're dismissed. Sarah turned toward the door on unsteady legs, but Blackwell's voice stopped her before she could escape. Oh, and Dr. Mitchell? I've taken the liberty of informing Dr. Ramos that you won't be available for any future pediatric consultations. I'm sure you understand the necessity of maintaining appropriate departmental boundaries. The words hit her like a slap across the face. Sarah nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and walked out of Blackwell's office with as much dignity as she could muster. But as soon as the door closed behind her, she found herself leaning against the corridor wall, fighting to keep the tears that threatened to spill over. She had failed Lily Chen before she'd even had a chance to try. The walk back to the medical library felt endless. Sarah moved through the hospital corridors like a ghost, invisible once again but now by design rather than circumstance. Other residents and attending physicians passed her without acknowledgement, their attention focused on more important matters than a second-year intern who had just been professionally neutered for the crime of caring too much. The library was nearly empty at this time of day. Most residents were either in patient rooms or surgery, actually practicing medicine while she was condemned to theoretical busywork. Sarah found a corner table near the back, surrounded by towering shelves of medical journals, and tried to pretend that spending the next 2 weeks reading about other people's patients was anything other than academic exile. But as she opened her laptop and stared at the blank document where she was supposed to begin her analysis of professional boundaries, her mind kept drifting back to room 612, to Lily's trusting smile and Maria's desperate hope, to the promise she had made and would now be prevented from keeping. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dr. Sarah, this is Maria Chen. The nurse gave me your number. Lily keeps asking when you're coming back to visit. When should I tell her you'll be here?" Sarah stared at the message until the words blurred together, her throat closing around emotions she couldn't afford to express. She started to type several responses. Explanations, apologies, promises she couldn't keep, but deleted each one before hitting send. Because how do you tell a dying child's mother that the hospital administration considers your compassion a liability? How do you explain that caring too much was apparently a fireable offense? How do you admit that for all your medical training and brilliant diagnoses, you were ultimately powerless to protect the people who needed you most? Instead, Sarah closed her phone and opened the first research article in what would undoubtedly be a very long day of academic penance. But as she tried to focus on an analysis of physician emotional detachment protocols, her mind kept returning to a conversation she'd had with her mother during her final week of life. Mija, Elena had whispered from her hospital bed, her voice already thin with approaching death. "Promise me something. When you become a doctor, don't let them make you forget that sick people are still people first. The most important medicine sometimes isn't pills or procedures. It's just showing up. It's letting someone know they matter enough to fight for." Sarah had promised. And now, trapped in academic exile for the crime of trying to keep that promise, she realized that fighting for people like Lily Chen might require her to risk everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The question that haunted her as she sat surrounded by dusty medical journals was simple and terrible. Was she brave enough to pay that price? The next morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made everything in the city look washed out and temporary. Sarah sat in the medical library at 7 a.m., surrounded by towers of research journals and the lingering smell of yesterday's coffee, trying to concentrate on an article about physician burnout while her mind kept drifting to room 612, 6 floors above her head. She had been there for 2 hours already, partly because academic exile meant she had nowhere else to be, but mostly because sleep had become impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily's trusting face and heard Maria's desperate voice asking when Dr. Sarah was coming back to visit. The library's main door opened with a soft whisper of hydraulics, and Sarah looked up to see Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the hospital's chief of staff, entering with a small group of men in expensive suits. Sarah recognized the ritual immediately. Hospital administrators giving donors and investors the grand tour, showing off Presbyterian Medical Center's cutting-edge facilities to people whose financial support kept the institution running. Sarah hunched deeper into her corner, hoping to remain invisible while they passed through. The last thing she needed was for Dr. Santos to notice her sitting in exile, reading about professional boundaries instead of actually practicing medicine. But as the group approached her section of the library, Sarah caught fragments of their conversation that made her attention sharpen despite herself. Our pediatric oncology program has some of the best survival rates in the region, Dr. Santos was saying. We've been particularly successful with acute lymphoblastic leukemia cases, especially in younger patients. In fact, we just admitted a new all case yesterday, 6-year-old girl, excellent prognosis if we can maintain the full treatment protocol. One of the men, tall, dark-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, paused near the shelves closest to her table. What about financial accessibility? He asked quietly. Are families without comprehensive insurance able to access the same level of care? The question caught Dr. Santos slightly off guard, and Sarah saw her smile falter for just a moment before snapping back into place. Well, of course we work with all families to ensure that financial considerations don't prevent appropriate medical care, she said carefully. We have several programs designed to assist with payment arrangements. But the full treatment protocol, the man pressed gently. 24 to 36 months of intensive chemotherapy, regular monitoring, potential complications requiring emergency interventions. What does that actually cost a family whose insurance covers, say, 70%? Sarah found herself leaning forward slightly, surprised by the specificity of his knowledge and the persistence of his questioning. Most hospital donors were content with general reassurances about charitable care programs. This man seemed to understand exactly what families like the Chens were facing. Dr. Santos cleared her throat delicately. Those are very specific financial questions that would really need to be addressed by our billing department and social services team. Each case is unique, of course. Of course, the man agreed, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't satisfied with the deflection. I'd be interested in speaking with some of your pediatric oncology staff directly, understanding their perspective on treatment accessibility. Certainly, Dr. Santos said quickly. I'll arrange meetings with Dr. Ramos and her team. They can provide much more detailed information about our clinical protocols and outcomes. As the group moved deeper into the library, Sarah caught sight of the dark-haired man's profile and felt a strange flicker of recognition, though she was certain they'd never met. There was something about the careful attention he paid to Dr. Santos's words, the way he seemed to be listening for what wasn't being said as much as what was. Her phone buzzed with another text from Lily Chen. Lily had a hard night. Asking for you again. I know you're busy, but if you could just visit for a few minutes? Sarah stared at the message, her chest tightening with familiar guilt. She started to type an explanation about being reassigned to research duties, then deleted it. Instead, she wrote back, "How is she feeling this morning?" The response came quickly. "Scared about starting treatment tomorrow. Keeps saying she wants to talk to Elena's daughter about whether the medicine will hurt." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Lily's trust like a physical ache. A 6-year-old child was about to begin chemotherapy, and she wanted comfort from someone whose mother had cleaned these floors. Dr. Mitchell? Sarah looked up, startled, to find Dr. Santos standing beside her table with the group of donors. The chief of staff's expression was carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the slight tightness around her eyes that suggested she was less than thrilled to find a resident in the library during clinical hours. "Dr. Santos," Sarah said quietly, starting to rise. "Please, don't get up," the chief of staff said with forced warmth. "Gentlemen, this is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, one of our internal medicine residents. Dr. Mitchell, I was just showing our visitors some of our educational resources." The dark-haired man stepped forward, extending his hand. "Ethan Cross," he said simply. "Cross Medical Technologies." The name hit Sarah like lightning. Cross Medical Technologies, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country, known for innovative cancer treatments and patient assistance programs. She had read about their work in medical journals, particularly their efforts to provide medications to uninsured patients. "Mr. Cross," she managed, shaking his hand. "It's an honor to meet you. Dr. Mitchell, I'm curious, What's your perspective on pediatric oncology treatment accessibility? From a resident's point of view. The question was clearly addressed to her, but Sarah felt Dr. Santos's sharp attention like a warning. She was supposed to be researching professional boundaries, not discussing hospital policies with major donors. I think, Sarah began carefully, then stopped. She could give the safe answer. Talk about excellent protocols and comprehensive care programs. Or she could tell the truth about families forced to choose between financial ruin and their children's lives. I think, Sarah said quietly, that we have the medical knowledge to cure childhood leukemia, but we haven't figured out how to make that cure accessible to every child who needs it. Which means we're failing the families who need us most. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Dr. Santos's face had gone carefully blank, and Sarah realized she had just criticized hospital policy in front of a major donor. But Ethan Cross nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. Have you worked with many pediatric oncology cases, Dr. Mitchell? Actually, Dr. Santos interjected quickly, Dr. Mitchell is currently focused on internal medicine research. She's been assigned to some very important projects in our medical library. It was a polite way of saying Sarah was in academic exile. Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment, but when she glanced at Ethan Cross, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not dismissal, but recognition. Research is crucial, he agreed mildly. Though I've always found that the most valuable insights come from physicians who stay close to actual patient care. As the group prepared to move on, Ethan Cross handed Sarah a standard business card. Dr. Mitchell, he said formally, if your research turns up anything particularly interesting about treatment accessibility issues, Cross Medical Technologies is always looking for ways to support meaningful healthcare research. Sarah took the card, noting the clean corporate design. Thank you, she said quietly. I'll keep that in mind. After they left, Sarah stared at the business card, her mind racing. The conversation felt like more than a random encounter, but she couldn't pinpoint why. His questions about treatment costs had been too specific, too informed, to be casual interest. Her phone buzzed again with a message from Maria. Starting treatment in 1 hour. Lily keeps asking for Dr. Sarah. She's so scared. Sarah looked from the message to the business card, then toward the elevator that would take her to the 6th floor. For the first time since her exile began, she wondered if there might be allies in unexpected places. People who understood that medicine was about more than protocols and professional boundaries. The question was whether she was brave enough to find out. Sarah's resolve lasted exactly until visiting hours ended at 9 p.m. She had spent the entire day in the medical library, dutifully reading articles about physician emotional boundaries while her phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from Lily Chen. Photos of Lily looking tiny and frightened in her hospital bed. Updates about the chemotherapy making her nauseated. Simple, heartbreaking questions. When is Dr. Sarah coming? By the time the library closed, Sarah felt like she was suffocating under the weight of her own helplessness. She took the elevator to the 6th floor before she could lose her nerve, telling herself she would just check in briefly. A 5-minute visit to reassure Lily, nothing more. The pediatric oncology ward was quieter at night, the cheerful daytime energy replaced by the subdued atmosphere of serious illness being fought with medical precision. Room 612 was partially dark, lit only by the soft glow of medical monitors. Sarah paused at the doorway, listening to the quiet murmur of voices inside, Maria speaking softly in Spanish to someone Sarah couldn't see from the hallway. She knocked gently on the doorframe. Maria? It's Dr. Sarah. The relief on Maria's face when she looked up was almost painful to witness. She was sitting beside Lily's bed, holding her daughter's small hand while the child slept fitfully, and 4-line running clear fluids into her arm. Dr. Sarah, Maria whispered, careful not to wake Lily. Thank God you came. She had such a hard day with the treatment. She kept asking for you. Sarah moved to the bedside, her medical training automatically assessing Lily's condition. The child looked pale and fragile against the hospital sheets, but her breathing was steady and the monitors showed stable vital signs. "How did the first treatment go?" Sarah asked quietly. "The doctors say it went well, but—" Maria's voice broke slightly. "She was so sick afterward, vomiting for hours. And the cost?" She shook her head, exhaustion written in every line of her face. "They gave me papers about payment plans, but even with insurance, the numbers are impossible." Sarah felt the familiar knot of frustration forming in her chest. This was exactly what she had been forbidden to address: the gap between excellent medical care and the families who couldn't afford to access it. "Have you spoken with social services?" she asked carefully. "There might be assistance programs. They said there's a waiting list," Maria interrupted. "Months long. And this can't wait months." She looked down at Lily's sleeping face with an expression of desperate love. "I would do anything for her, Dr. Sarah. Work 3 jobs, sell everything I own. But there isn't enough time to earn what this costs." Before Sarah could respond, she heard footsteps in the hallway and looked up to see a woman in business attire approaching the room. Early 40s, carrying a tablet and wearing the kind of professional confidence that suggested hospital administration. "Ms. Chen?" the woman said quietly, entering the room. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from Cross Medical Technologies. I apologize for the late hour, but I wanted to speak with you about Lily's treatment plan." Sarah felt a jolt of recognition at the company name, remembering her encounter with Ethan Cross that morning. But this felt different, less coincidental, more systematic. "I don't understand," Maria said, confusion evident in her voice. Jennifer Walsh glanced at Sarah, taking note of her presence but not commenting on it. Cross Medical Technologies has a patient assistance program for childhood cancer cases, she explained to Maria. "We can provide medications at no cost to families who qualify, and we also work with hospitals to ensure that treatment protocols aren't interrupted by financial constraints." "But why?" Maria began, then stopped. "I don't understand why anyone would help us. We didn't apply for anything. Our company reviews new admissions for childhood cancers at several hospitals," Jennifer explained smoothly. "When we see cases where financial barriers might interfere with optimal treatment, we reach out proactively." Sarah listened to this explanation with growing surprise. It was plausible. Pharmaceutical companies did run assistance programs, and proactive outreach made business sense if you were trying to ensure your medications reached the patients who needed them. But the timing felt remarkably convenient. "What would we need to do?" Maria asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time since Sarah had met her. "Some paperwork, income verification, that sort of thing. But if you qualify, and based on the preliminary information I have, you should. We can have assistance in place before Lily's next treatment cycle." Lily stirred in her bed, her eyes fluttering open at the sound of unfamiliar voices. When she saw Sarah, her face lit up with genuine joy despite her obvious exhaustion. "Dr. Sarah," she whispered. "You came back." "I promised I would," Sarah said softly, taking the child's small hand in hers. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "The medicine made me really sick," Lily admitted, "but Mama says it's going to help me get better." "Is that true?" Sarah felt the weight of the question, the absolute trust in a 6-year-old's voice asking about her own mortality. "The medicine is very strong," she said carefully, "and it might make you feel sick sometimes while it's working. But yes, it's designed to help you get better." "Will you help take care of me while I'm getting better?" Lily asked, and Sarah felt her heart clench at the innocent faith in the question. Before she could answer, her pager buzzed with a message that made her stomach drop. "Dr. Mitchell, report to Dr. Blackwell's office first thing tomorrow morning. Patient contact violation." Sarah's blood ran cold. Someone had reported her presence in the pediatric ward. Probably a nurse doing routine documentation who'd noted an internal medicine resident in an unauthorized location. "Is everything okay?" Jennifer Walsh asked, noticing Sarah's expression. I have to go, Sarah said quietly, but Lily's small hand tightened around hers. Will you come back tomorrow? The little girl asked, her voice small with fear. Sarah looked from Lily's trusting face to Maria's desperate hope, knowing that her answer might determine not just the child's comfort but potentially her own career. Dr. Blackwell was already looking for reasons to extend her exile from patient care. Being caught visiting unauthorized patients would give him exactly the ammunition he needed to make that exile permanent. I'll come back, she said quietly, and meant it completely. As she walked toward what felt like certain professional destruction, Sarah realized that some promises were worth keeping regardless of the cost. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with Ethan Cross that morning and Jennifer Walsh's appearance tonight weren't entirely coincidental. The question was whether someone was trying to help her keep her promise to Lily, or whether she was walking into a situation she didn't fully understand. Part 6. Dr. Blackwell's office at 8 a.m. felt like a courtroom designed for summary executions. Sarah sat in the hard wooden chair across from his mahogany desk, her hands folded in her lap to stop them from trembling, while he reviewed what appeared to be a detailed report about her unauthorized visit to the pediatric ward. The silence stretched between them like a blade, sharp enough to cut through any remaining illusions she might have harbored about her standing in the residency program. Dr. Mitchell, Blackwell finally said, his voice carrying the particular tone reserved for professional disappointments that had exceeded all reasonable expectations. According to this nursing report, you were observed in room 612 at approximately 9:15 last evening, engaged in unauthorized patient consultation with a pediatric oncology case. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on a point just above his left shoulder, a trick she had learned during medical school for surviving brutal attending rounds. Yes, sir. I was visiting the patient briefly. Visiting. Blackwell repeated the word as though it carried a foul smell. Dr. Mitchell, you seem to be laboring under the fundamental misapprehension that residency training is some sort of social work program where personal feelings supersede medical protocols. The unfairness of it burned in Sarah's chest, but she had learned that defending herself only provided Blackwell with additional ammunition. I understand your concerns about professional boundaries, she said carefully. Do you? Blackwell leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with the clinical detachment of a pathologist examining tissue samples. Because your behavior suggests otherwise. You were explicitly reassigned to research duties to help you develop appropriate professional distance. Instead, you chose to ignore that assignment and engage in unauthorized patient contact that could expose this hospital to liability issues. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Liability issues? The child in question isn't your patient, Dr. Mitchell. You have no standing to provide medical advice, no authorization to discuss treatment protocols, and no business developing personal relationships with pediatric oncology families. Blackwell's voice remained perfectly level, but Sarah caught the subtle satisfaction in his pale eyes. If that family were to experience an adverse outcome and decide to pursue legal action, your unauthorized involvement could complicate the hospital's position significantly. The implication hit her like a physical blow. Blackwell was suggesting that caring about Lily Chen made her a potential threat to the institution's legal protection. It was the kind of bureaucratic logic that turned compassion into liability and reduced dying children to risk management calculation. Sir, Sarah began, then stopped. Because what could she say? That Lily had specifically asked for her? That Maria Chen needed someone who understood what it meant to fight for medical care from the margins? That sometimes the most important medicine was simply showing up when someone needed you to keep your word? All of those things were true, but none of them mattered in Blackwell's universe where protocols trumped human connection and institutional protection outweighed individual suffering. I see I've finally managed to penetrate your remarkable capacity for self-justification, Blackwell observed with something approaching satisfaction. Good. That suggests you're still capable of learning, even if the process requires more dramatic intervention than I initially anticipated. Sarah's pager buzzed against her hip, but she didn't dare look at it while Blackwell was speaking. The sound seemed to amplify in the silent office, a sharp electronic intrusion that made both of them aware of the medical world continuing its urgent business beyond this disciplinary proceeding. Effective immediately, Blackwell continued, you are suspended from all patient contact for the remainder of your rotation. No hospital floors, no patient rooms, no consultations of any kind. You'll complete your research assignment from home and report your findings to me in writing. Consider this your final opportunity to demonstrate that you understand the difference between practicing medicine and indulging personal emotional needs. The punishment was worse than Sarah had expected. Home suspension meant complete exile from the hospital environment, cutting her off not just from patient care but from the entire educational structure of residency training. It was the kind of disciplinary action that would follow her to future rotations, making her toxic to attending physicians who valued reliability and institutional loyalty above clinical innovation. How long? Sarah asked quietly. 2 weeks minimum, Blackwell said with the precision of someone who had calculated the maximum punishment he could impose without formal disciplinary proceedings. Longer if your written analysis fails to demonstrate appropriate understanding of professional boundaries. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. 2 weeks away from the hospital would feel like 2 years, especially knowing that Lily was beginning the most difficult phase of her treatment protocol. There is, however, one additional matter, Blackwell continued, and something in his tone made Sarah look up sharply. It has come to my attention that representatives from Cross Medical Technologies visited the pediatric ward last evening, coincidentally at the same time as your unauthorized consultation. Sarah felt ice water flood her veins. Sir, pharmaceutical companies maintain very careful records of their assistance program outreach, Dr. Mitchell. It would be unfortunate if there were any suggestion that hospital personnel had inappropriately influenced their patient selection processes. The implication was clear and terrifying. Blackwell was suggesting that Sarah might have somehow orchestrated Cross Medical Technologies' assistance for Lily Chen, potentially violating federal regulations about pharmaceutical company relationships with healthcare providers. I had nothing to do with that, Sarah said quickly. I met Mr. Cross briefly yesterday during a hospital tour, but I never discussed specific patients with him. I'm sure you didn't, Blackwell said smoothly. However, the appearance of impropriety can be just as damaging as actual misconduct, which is why you'll have no further contact with Cross Medical Technologies representatives or any other pharmaceutical company personnel while you're completing your research assignment. Sarah stared at him in growing horror. He was systematically cutting off every possible avenue she might have to help Lily Chen, ensuring that her suspension would prevent not just unauthorized comfort visits but any practical assistance she might try to arrange. Do I make myself clear, Dr. Mitchell? Yes, sir, Sarah whispered. Excellent. Blackwell turned his attention back to the papers on his desk, dismissing her with the casual efficiency of someone discarding medical waste. You'll receive detailed instructions for your research assignment by email this afternoon. I suggest you use this time for serious reflection about your priorities and your future in this profession. Sarah stood and walked toward the door on unsteady legs, but Blackwell's voice stopped her before she could escape. Oh, and Dr. Mitchell? I trust you'll have the good judgment to avoid any further unauthorized visits to the pediatric ward. Security has been notified to monitor that area more carefully. The words hit her like a slap across the face. Blackwell had essentially placed Lily's room under surveillance to prevent Sarah from keeping the promise she had made to a frightened 6-year-old child. Sarah nodded once and left his office, her face burning with humiliation and impotent rage. But as she walked through the hospital corridors one last time before her exile began, her pager buzzed with a message that made her stop in her tracks. Meet me in the hospital coffee shop. We need to talk. Sarah stared at the message, her mind racing. Ethan Cross wanted to meet with her directly, just hours after Blackwell had essentially forbidden her from having any contact with pharmaceutical company representatives. It could be a coincidence, or it could be the trap that would end her medical career permanently. But as she thought about Lily's trusting face and Maria's desperate hope, Sarah realized that some risks were worth taking, even if they led to destruction. Because her mother had taught her that the measure of a physician wasn't whether they followed every rule perfectly, but whether they had the courage to fight for the people who had no one else to fight for them. The question was whether she was brave enough to honor that lesson, even if it cost her everything. The hospital coffee shop occupied a corner of the main lobby, strategically positioned to catch both visitors seeking comfort and medical staff desperate for caffeine. At 9:30 a.m., it was nearly empty. The morning rush of tired residents had passed, and the afternoon crowd of anxious families hadn't yet arrived. Sarah found Ethan Cross sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall, wearing dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that made him look more like a concerned family member than a pharmaceutical CEO worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He looked up as she approached, and she caught something in his expression, concern, perhaps, or calculation. It was impossible to tell which. "Dr. Mitchell," he said quietly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." Sarah remained standing, acutely aware that they were still technically on hospital property and that Blackwell's warning about pharmaceutical company contact was less than an hour old. "I'm not sure I should be here," she said honestly. "Because of Dr. Blackwell?" Ethan's question was direct enough to surprise her. "Jennifer Walsh mentioned that you seemed concerned about something when she met with the Chen family last night." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Jennifer Walsh had been more observant than she'd realized, and Cross Medical Technologies apparently maintained detailed records of their patient assistance encounters. "How much do you know about my situation?" "Enough to know that you're in trouble for caring about a patient you're not supposed to care about," Ethan said quietly. "Please sit down. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Against her better judgment, Sarah took the chair across from him, positioning herself so she could see the hospital lobby and anyone who might be watching their conversation. "Mr. Cross, I appreciate what your company is doing for Lily Chen, but I can't be involved in any discussions about pharmaceutical assistance programs. It could be seen as a conflict of interest." "By Dr. Blackwell, you mean?" The way he said it made Sarah look at him more sharply. "What do you know about Dr. Blackwell?" "I know that he's been the director of internal medicine here for 8 years, and that he's built a reputation for running one of the most rigorous residency programs in the region," Ethan said carefully. "I also know that rigor sometimes comes at the cost of the qualities that make physicians effective advocates for their patients." Sarah studied his face, trying to understand what he wasn't saying directly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you're fighting the right battle, but you're fighting it alone and without the resources you need to win." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to ensure their conversation remained private. "Dr. Mitchell, can I ask you something personal?" Sarah tensed. "That depends on what it is." "Your mother, Elena Mitchell. She cleaned the Cross Technologies building downtown for about 3 years, didn't she? Night shift, usually finishing around 2 a.m.? The confirmation hit Sarah like a small shock. "You really did know her." "We spoke a few times when I was working late," Ethan said quietly. She was kind to someone who was going through a very difficult period." "I never forgot that." Sarah waited for him to elaborate, but he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "What does that have to do with Lily Chen?" "Your mother talked about her daughter who was going to be a doctor," Ethan continued. "Someone who was brilliant and determined and would never give up fighting for people who needed help. When I met you yesterday and heard you talk about failing the families who need us most..." He paused. "You sounded exactly like Elena." The comparison made Sarah's throat tighten with emotion, but she forced herself to remain focused. "Mr. Cross, I still don't understand what you want from me. I want to offer you a job." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Cross Medical Technologies is developing a new initiative focused on treatment accessibility barriers, Ethan explained. "We need someone with clinical experience who understands both the medical side and the human cost of our current healthcare system. Someone who can identify the real obstacles that prevent effective treatments from reaching the patients who need them." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly around her. "You're offering me a job based on one conversation? I'm offering you a position based on watching you risk your career to keep a promise to a 6-year-old girl," Ethan said quietly. "That kind of ethical courage is exactly what this initiative needs." The offer was tempting in ways that scared her. A position at Cross Medical Technologies would mean financial security, the chance to work on treatment accessibility issues from a position of real power, an escape from the suffocating hierarchy that had just exiled her from patient care. But it would also mean abandoning her residency training, giving up her dream of becoming a practicing physician, and potentially proving Blackwell's point about her priorities being fundamentally misplaced. "I can't leave my residency program," Sarah said finally. "Even if it's destroying your ability to help the people you care about?" The question hit too close to home. Sarah looked around the coffee shop, noting the handful of other patrons. A tired-looking woman who might have been waiting for surgical news, an elderly man reading a newspaper with hands that shook slightly, a young couple speaking in urgent whispers over tablets displaying what looked like insurance paperwork. "What kind of position?" she asked despite herself. "Clinical liaison for our patient assistance programs," Ethan said. "You'd work directly with hospitals to identify accessibility barriers and develop solutions. Real solutions, not bureaucratic workarounds." "And the salary?" "Enough to pay off your medical school loans and support yourself comfortably while doing work that actually makes a difference." The offer was almost too good to be true, which made Sarah immediately suspicious. "Why me? You could hire someone with more experience, better credentials, fewer complications." "Because I need someone who understands what it's like to fight for healthcare from the margins," Ethan said simply. "Someone who won't be satisfied with policy papers and committee meetings when children like Lily Chen are facing impossible choices." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from Maria Chen. "Lily asking for you again. Had hard night with treatment. Doctors say this is normal but she's scared. When can you visit?" Sarah stared at the message, feeling the weight of her promise and the impossibility of keeping it. She was banned from the hospital, forbidden from patient contact, and potentially under surveillance for unauthorized compassion. "You can't help her from the outside," Ethan said quietly, apparently reading her expression. "But you could help hundreds of families like hers if you had the right position and resources." Sarah looked up from her phone to find him watching her with an expression that was difficult to read. "Is this about Lily specifically, or about something else?" "It's about recognizing that sometimes the system needs to be changed from the outside, not reformed from within," Ethan said. "Your mother understood that. She knew that real change came from people who refused to accept that suffering was inevitable just because it was institutionalized." The invocation of her mother felt both genuine and calculated, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was heading somewhere she hadn't anticipated. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Of course." Ethan pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. "I'm sending you my direct contact information. Take whatever time you need, but—" He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "Don't let them convince you that caring too much is a character flaw. The world needs physicians who understand that medicine is about more than protocols and profit margins." As he stood to leave, Sarah found herself asking the question that had been nagging at her since their first meeting. Mr. Cross, how did you know I would be in the coffee shop this morning? How did you even know to contact me? Ethan paused, and for a moment, his carefully controlled expression slipped to reveal something more complicated underneath. Because I've been where you are now, he said quietly. Fighting a system that punishes compassion and rewards compliance. And because I promised someone I cared about that I would help people like you when I had the power to do it. He walked away before Sarah could ask who that someone was, leaving her alone at the corner table with an impossible decision and the growing suspicion that her encounter with Cross Medical Technologies was about more than random corporate philanthropy. But as she stared at the business card he'd left behind and thought about Lily Chen asking when Dr. Sarah was coming back, Sarah realized that the most important question wasn't about Ethan Cross's motivations. It was about whether she had the courage to choose a path that might actually allow her to keep the promises she made to people who had no one else to fight for them. Even if that path led away from everything she had thought she wanted. 2 days into her home suspension, Sarah felt like she was disappearing from her own life. Her studio apartment in Queens, chosen for its proximity to the subway and its merciful cheapness, had become both sanctuary and prison. She sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by research articles about professional boundaries that she was supposed to synthesize into a comprehensive analysis for Dr. Blackwell, but the words blurred together into meaningless academic jargon that had nothing to do with the reality of sick children and desperate families. Her phone sat silent beside her laptop, displaying the last message from Maria Chen from the night before. Lily had another hard day with chemo. Keeps asking when Dr. Sarah is coming to visit. I don't know what to tell her anymore. Sarah had stared at that message for 20 minutes before finally typing back. Please tell Lily that Dr. Sarah is thinking about her and that she's very brave. It was inadequate and hollow, the kind of response that satisfied no one but avoided making promises she was forbidden to keep. The business card Ethan Cross had left at the coffee shop lay beside her phone like a small dare. She had read it dozens of times over the past 48 hours, memorizing the clean corporate typography and the direct phone number he had written on the back in careful handwriting. But she hadn't called, because calling would mean acknowledging that her medical career might be over before it had really begun. Her laptop chimed with an incoming email, and Sarah looked up to see a message from Dr. Santos, the chief of staff. Her stomach dropped as she opened it, expecting another layer of disciplinary action or perhaps notification that her suspension had been extended indefinitely. Instead, she found something unexpected. Dr. Mitchell, I hope your research assignment is progressing well. I wanted you to know that the Chen family specifically asked about you during rounds yesterday. Dr. Ramos mentioned that the little girl has been asking for Dr. Sarah quite frequently. While I understand you're currently assigned to research duties, I thought you should know that your brief interaction with the family made a positive impression. Please let me know if you need any additional resources for your boundary analysis project. Dr. Santos. Sarah read the message 3 times, trying to decode what Dr. Santos was actually saying. On the surface, it was a routine check-in about her research progress. But the specific mention of Lily asking for her felt deliberate, as though Dr. Santos was sending information she thought Sarah needed to have. More puzzling was the fact that Dr. Santos had bothered to write at all. Chiefs of staff didn't typically monitor suspended residents' research projects personally, and the casual mention of Lily's questions suggested that someone had specifically briefed Dr. Santos about the situation. Sarah's phone rang, startling her out of her analysis. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a 212 area code, Manhattan. Dr. Mitchell? The voice was professional, female, and vaguely familiar. This is Jennifer Walsh from Cross Medical Technologies. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Ms. Walsh, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I apologize for calling directly, but I wanted to follow up on the Chen family's case. The paperwork for their assistance program has been processed, and we're ready to begin coverage for Lily's treatment protocol." That should have been good news, but something in Jennifer's tone suggested there were complications. "Is there a problem?" "Not with our assistance program," Jennifer said carefully. "But Dr. Ramos mentioned that the family has been asking about a specific physician, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who apparently made quite an impression during their initial consultation. They're requesting that she be included in their treatment team discussions." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of impossible situations. "Ms. Walsh, I'm sure Dr. Ramos explained that I'm not actually assigned to pediatric oncology. She did mention that you're currently working on a research project," Jennifer agreed. "But she also said that families have the right to request specific physicians for consultation, especially when there are communication or cultural considerations involved." The carefully neutral language made Sarah wonder how much Jennifer Walsh actually knew about her suspension and the circumstances surrounding it. "What kind of consultation?" "Nothing formal," Jennifer said quickly. "Just occasional check-ins to help with family communication and treatment comprehension. The kind of support that helps ensure optimal adherence to therapy protocols." Sarah found herself staring at Ethan Cross's business card as Jennifer Walsh outlined what sounded like a perfectly reasonable accommodation for a family struggling with language barriers and medical complexity. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was connected to the job offer Ethan had made in the coffee shop. "Ms. Walsh, can I ask you something directly?" "Of course." "Did Mr. Cross ask you to call me about this?" There was a brief pause, and when Jennifer spoke again, her voice had lost some of its professional neutrality. "Mr. Cross believes that optimal patient outcomes require removing unnecessary barriers between families and the healthcare providers they trust. If a 6-year-old child is asking for a specific doctor, that's clinically relevant information that should be addressed, not ignored for administrative convenience." The non-answer was answer enough. Ethan Cross was orchestrating this call, creating opportunities for Sarah to maintain contact with Lily Chen despite Dr. Blackwell's prohibition. But he was doing it carefully, through legitimate channels that would be difficult for anyone to characterize as improper influence. "What would this consultation arrangement look like?" Sarah asked. "Informal meetings with the family, maybe twice a week, to discuss treatment progress and address any concerns they might have. You'd be working as a cross-medical technologies consultant, not as a hospital employee, so it wouldn't conflict with your current research assignment." Sarah felt her breath catch. "A consultant position? Temporary, of course, just for the duration of Lily's treatment. But it would allow you to maintain the therapeutic relationship you've already established while providing valuable feedback about accessibility barriers in pediatric oncology care." The offer was elegant in its simplicity. Sarah could continue to support Lily and Maria without violating the terms of her suspension, because she wouldn't technically be functioning as a hospital resident. She would be a pharmaceutical company consultant providing family support services, a perfectly legitimate role that existed in healthcare systems throughout the country. But accepting would also mean stepping outside the traditional medical training pathway, potentially burning bridges with Dr. Blackwell that could never be rebuilt. "I need to think about this," Sarah said finally. "Of course," Jennifer agreed. "But I should mention that we'd need to begin the consultation arrangement fairly quickly. Lily starts her next treatment cycle on Monday, and Dr. Ramos feels that family support during the transition period could be crucial for adherence." After ending the call, Sarah sat in her quiet apartment, staring at the research articles she was supposed to be analyzing and thinking about the choice that was crystallizing in front of her. She could complete Blackwell's punishment assignment, return to her residency training, and hope that time would eventually restore her standing in the program. Or she could accept cross-medical technologies offer and maintain her connection to Lily Chen, even if it meant stepping away from the traditional path toward becoming a practicing physician. Her phone buzzed with another text from Maria. "Lily drew you a picture today. She wanted me to send it." The attached image showed a crayon drawing that was unmistakably Lily's work. Stick figures in white coats standing beside a hospital bed, with Dr. Sarah written in careful letters above one of the figures. At the bottom, in Maria's handwriting, was a message. She says this is you taking care of her when the medicine makes her scared. Sarah stared at the drawing until her vision blurred with tears. A 6-year-old child had drawn her as a figure of comfort and safety, someone who would be present during the most frightening experience of her young life. It was the kind of trust that couldn't be replaced by protocol compliance or professional detachment. She picked up her phone and dialed the number on Ethan Cross's business card before she could lose her nerve. He answered on the second ring. "Dr. Mitchell." "Mr. Cross," Sarah said quietly. "About that consultation position. I'd like to hear more details." There was a brief pause, and when he spoke, she could hear something like relief in his voice. "I was hoping you'd call. Can you meet me tomorrow afternoon? There's someone I'd like you to meet." "Someone?" "Dr. Amanda Ross. She was a cardiologist at Mount Sinai before she died. She believed that the most important work in medicine happened in the spaces between protocol and compassion." The way he said her name, with careful reverence, as though he were handling something precious and fragile, made Sarah understand that she was about to learn something important about Ethan Cross's motivations. "She was important to you," Sarah said quietly. "She was my fiancée. And she taught me that sometimes the people worth fighting for are the ones the system has decided don't matter enough to save." The conversation ended with plans to meet the following afternoon, but as Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that she wasn't just accepting a consulting position. She was stepping into a story that had begun long before she met Lily Chen, one that connected her mother's late-night conversations with a grieving billionaire to a dead cardiologist's belief that medicine was fundamentally about human connection rather than institutional compliance. And for the first time since Dr. Blackwell had banished her to academic exile, Sarah felt like she might be moving toward something that mattered more than professional advancement or career security. She was moving toward the chance to keep promises to people who had no one else to fight for them. The address Ethan Cross had given her led to a brownstone in the Upper East Side that looked more like a private residence than a corporate office. Sarah climbed the stone steps at exactly 2 p.m., noting the small brass plaque beside the door that read Cross Foundation, Private, and wondering what she had gotten herself into. Ethan answered the door himself, wearing jeans and a navy sweater that made him look more like an off-duty professor than a pharmaceutical CEO. "Dr. Mitchell," he said with a slight smile. "Thank you for coming." "This isn't what I expected," Sarah said, looking around the foyer with its warm lighting and comfortable furniture that seemed designed for conversation rather than business meetings. "The corporate offices can be intimidating," Ethan said, leading her toward a sitting room that overlooked a small garden. "I thought this might be better for the kind of discussion we need to have." The sitting room was filled with books and photographs, and Sarah found herself drawn to a collection of medical journals on one of the shelves. But it was the photograph on the side table that made her stop, a woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, wearing scrubs and smiling at the camera with the kind of joy that seemed to light up the entire frame. "Dr. Amanda Ross," Ethan said quietly, following her gaze. "She would have liked you." "She was beautiful," Sarah said softly. "She was brilliant," Ethan corrected gently. "Beautiful too, but that wasn't what made her special. She had this way of seeing patients as complete human beings rather than collections of symptoms to be managed. It drove her attending physicians crazy because she spent too much time listening and not enough time processing cases efficiently." Sarah heard the echo of her own struggles with Dr. Blackwell in that description. "What happened to her?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of grief that had been carefully managed but never fully healed. "Medical error. She was working a 36-hour shift in the cardiac ICU when she developed chest pain. The attending physician who examined her attributed it to stress and exhaustion, sent her home with instructions to get some rest. He paused. She had a massive heart attack in her apartment 12 hours later. I'm so sorry, Sarah said, and meant it. She was 29 years old, Ethan continued. Brilliant, compassionate, dedicated to helping people who couldn't advocate for themselves. And she died because someone made assumptions based on her age and her appearance instead of listening to what she was trying to tell them. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Medical errors that resulted from biased assumptions weren't uncommon. Young physicians dismissed because they were presumed to be anxious rather than sick, women's symptoms minimized because they were assumed to be emotional rather than physical. It was the kind of systemic problem that claimed lives while maintaining the fiction of evidence-based care. Is that why you started the foundation? Amanda had been working on a research project about accessibility barriers in cardiac care, Ethan explained. She was documenting how patients from lower socioeconomic backgrounds received different quality of care, even when they presented with identical symptoms. Her data was compelling. He moved to a desk near the window and returned with a thick binder that he handed to Sarah. She opened it to find pages of meticulously documented case studies, statistical analyses, and patient interviews that painted a devastating picture of healthcare inequality. She spent her free time collecting this information, Ethan said. Hundreds of hours of work, all done on her own time, because she believed that documenting the problem was the first step toward fixing it. Sarah turned through the pages, recognizing the kind of obsessive attention to detail that characterized physicians who couldn't let go of injustice they had witnessed. This is extraordinary work. Work that died with her, Ethan said quietly. Because individual physicians, no matter how dedicated, can't change systemic problems on their own. They need institutional support, financial resources, and protection from the kind of administrative retaliation that punishes people for caring too much. Sarah looked up from the binder to find Ethan watching her with an expression of careful attention. Is that what you're offering me? Institutional support. I'm offering you the chance to finish Amanda's work, Ethan said simply. To take her research about accessibility barriers and turn it into something that actually changes how families like the Chens experience the healthcare system. The offer was larger than Sarah had anticipated. She had expected a temporary consulting position that would allow her to maintain contact with Lily Chen. Instead, Ethan was proposing that she step into a research role that could have national implications for healthcare policy. Why me? She asked. You could hire someone with more experience, better credentials. Because I need someone who understands what it's like to be dismissed by the medical establishment for having inconvenient priorities, Ethan interrupted gently. Someone who won't be satisfied with incremental policy changes that look good on paper but don't help the families who are facing impossible choices right now. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from Maria Chen. Emergency room with Lily. Fever and vomiting. Doctors say might be infection. So scared. Wish Dr. Sarah was here. Sarah stared at the message, her medical training immediately cataloging the potential complications of fever and vomiting in a pediatric oncology patient. Infection during chemotherapy could be life-threatening, especially in children whose immune systems were compromised by treatment. Is everything all right? Ethan asked, noting her expression. Lily Chen is in the emergency room, Sarah said, already reaching for her jacket. Possible infection. Go, Ethan said immediately. We can finish this conversation later. I can't, Sarah said, frustration evident in her voice. I'm suspended from patient contact, remember? If Dr. Blackwell finds out I was in the ER. You won't be there as a hospital resident, Ethan said calmly. You'll be there as a cross-foundation consultant, providing family support services for one of our patient assistance cases. Sarah stared at him. Is that legal? Completely. I'll send the paperwork to Dr. Santos and Dr. Ramos within the hour. As far as the hospital administration is concerned, you're a pharmaceutical company employee providing legitimate consulting services. The speed with which he was willing to formalize her position suggested that Ethan had been prepared for exactly this scenario. But Sarah was too worried about Lily to analyze his motivations. What about Dr. Blackwell? We'll have no authority over cross-foundation employees, Ethan said firmly. Dr. Mitchell, a 6-year-old girl, is asking for you. Everything else is just bureaucratic complications that can be managed. Sarah looked from her phone to Amanda Ross's photograph, then back to Ethan's steady gaze. She was standing at the exact moment when she had to choose between the safe path of institutional compliance and the uncertain territory of fighting for individual patients who had no other advocate. If I do this, she said quietly, if I accept this position and go to that emergency room, there's no going back to my residency program the way it was. Probably not, Ethan agreed. But there are other ways to practice medicine, Dr. Mitchell. Ways that might allow you to help more families like the Chens than you ever could working within a system that punishes compassion as a professional liability. Sarah's phone buzzed again with another message from Maria. Please pray for Lily. She looked at the simple request from a terrified mother whose 6-year-old daughter might be dying from the very treatment that was supposed to save her life, and realized that some decisions made themselves. Send the paperwork, she said quietly. I'll meet you at Presbyterian Medical Center. As she headed toward the door, Ethan called after her. Dr. Mitchell? Amanda would have been proud of you. Sarah paused at the threshold, thinking about a brilliant cardiologist who had died trying to document the inequalities that killed patients like Lily Chen every day, and about her own mother who had cleaned hospital floors while dreaming that her daughter would have the power to heal the people who mattered least to the medical establishment. I hope so, she said softly. I really hope so. The Presbyterian Medical Center emergency room at 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon was controlled chaos. Sarah walked through the automatic doors feeling like she was entering a war zone where she no longer knew which side she was fighting for. Her new Cross Foundation ID badge hung around her neck like a talisman against institutional rejection, but it couldn't protect her from the stares of nurses and residents who recognized her as the suspended intern returning under mysterious circumstances. She found Maria Chen in the family waiting area, clutching Lily's stuffed rabbit and looking smaller and more frightened than Sarah had ever seen her. When Maria looked up and saw Sarah approaching, her face crumpled with relief. Dr. Sarah, Maria whispered, rising to embrace her with the desperate gratitude of someone who had been drowning and suddenly found solid ground. Thank God you came. I didn't know who else to call. How is she? Sarah asked, her medical training taking over despite the complicated emotions swirling in her chest. Fever of 102, vomiting since this morning, Maria said, her voice shaking. They did blood tests and said her white cell count is very low. The doctor used words I don't understand: neutropenia, sepsis risk. She looked at Sarah with eyes that held the particular terror of parents facing medical terminology that might mean losing their child. Is she going to die? Sarah took Maria's hands in hers, feeling their tremor of fear. Neutropenia means her immune system is suppressed from the chemotherapy, which we expected. The fever could be a sign of infection, but that's why we monitor so carefully. Dr. Ramos and her team know exactly how to handle this. But the nurses keep saying if the cultures are positive, and depending on her response to antibiotics, Maria said, her voice breaking. They talk like she might not get better. Before Sarah could respond, she heard her name being called from across the waiting area. She turned to see Dr. Patricia Ramos approaching, wearing the kind of expression that emergency room physicians reserved for delicate situations requiring careful navigation. Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Ramos said carefully. I understand you're here as a Cross Foundation consultant? That's correct, Sarah replied, grateful that Ethan had managed to formalize her status so quickly. I received notification about Lily's admission and came to provide family support services. Dr. Ramos nodded slowly, and Sarah caught the subtle assessment in her eyes. the attending physician trying to determine whether this new arrangement was legitimate medical practice or elaborate workaround for disciplinary restrictions. I see. Well, since you're here in a consulting capacity, perhaps you could help Mrs. Chen understand Lily's current status. I'd be happy to, Sarah said, and followed Dr. Ramos toward the pediatric emergency bay where Lily was being monitored. The sight of the little girl hooked up to 4 antibiotics and continuous monitoring equipment hit Sarah like a physical blow. Lily looked impossibly small in the adult-sized emergency room bed, her dark hair damp with fever sweat and her usual bright energy replaced by the quiet listlessness of serious illness. But when she saw Sarah, Lily's face lit up with a smile that made Sarah's chest ache. "Dr. Sarah," Lily whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with genuine joy. "You came back. Mama said you might not be allowed to visit anymore." Sarah moved to the bedside, automatically checking the monitors and noting Lily's vital signs while keeping her expression calm and reassuring. "I'm here, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Really hot and my tummy hurts," Lily admitted. "The nurses keep putting cold things on my head and giving me medicine that tastes yucky." Dr. Ramos cleared her throat gently. "Lily developed a fever this morning, and her blood work shows significant neutropenia, white cell count below 500. We've started broad-spectrum antibiotics as a precaution, but we're waiting on culture results to identify any specific pathogens." Sarah nodded, translating the medical terminology into human terms. "The chemotherapy makes your body's infection-fighting cells very low, Lily. So when you get a fever, we have to be extra careful and give you special medicine to help your body fight off any germs." "Like superhero medicine?" Lily asked with the kind of innocent hope that made serious illness bearable for children. "Exactly like superhero medicine," Sarah confirmed, squeezing Lily's small hand gently. "Dr. Mitchell?" Dr. Ramos said quietly. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Sarah followed the attending physician to a quiet corner of the emergency bay, bracing herself for questions about her new consulting role that she wasn't entirely sure how to answer. "I have to ask," Dr. Ramos began carefully, "is this cross-foundation position legitimate? Because Dr. Blackwell has been asking questions about pharmaceutical company influence on patient care decisions." "It's completely legitimate," Sarah said firmly. Cross Medical Technologies has a family support program for their patient assistance cases. My role is to help families navigate treatment protocols and communicate effectively with medical teams. Dr. Ramos studied her face for a long moment. "And this has nothing to do with your personal connection to the Chen family?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "My personal connection is why I'm effective in this role, Dr. Ramos. Maria Chen trusts me, and Lily responds positively to my presence. That's not a conflict of interest, it's a therapeutic advantage." "I hope you're right," Dr. Ramos said quietly. "Because if this arrangement looks like an attempt to circumvent Dr. Blackwell's authority, it could make things very complicated for everyone involved." Before Sarah could respond, she heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Ethan Cross walking toward them with the confident stride of someone who belonged in any space he entered. He wore a dark suit and carried a leather portfolio that marked him as official business rather than casual visitor. "Dr. Ramos," Ethan said, extending his hand with professional courtesy. "Ethan Cross, Cross Medical Technologies. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Mr. Cross," Dr. Ramos replied, shaking his hand with the careful politeness reserved for pharmaceutical executives who could influence hospital funding. "I was just discussing Dr. Mitchell's consulting role with your foundation." "Of course," Ethan said smoothly. "I apologize for the short notice in formalizing the arrangement, but when we heard about Lily's emergency admission, we felt it was important to have our family liaison available immediately." Sarah watched this exchange with growing admiration for Ethan's ability to navigate institutional politics. He was speaking the language of corporate healthcare partnerships, framing Sarah's presence as standard operating procedure rather than personal intervention. The Chen family specifically requested Dr. Mitchell? Dr. Ramos asked. They did, Ethan confirmed. Cultural and communication barriers can significantly impact treatment adherence, especially in pediatric oncology cases. Having a trusted liaison who can bridge those gaps is clinically valuable for optimal outcomes. It was exactly the right answer. Medical necessity couched in corporate efficiency language that hospital administrators understood and approved of. Dr. Ramos nodded slowly, apparently satisfied that the arrangement had legitimate clinical justification. Well then, Dr. Ramos said, I'll update Lily's care team about Dr. Mitchell's consulting role. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on her latest lab results. After Dr. Ramos left, Sarah turned to Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. Thank you for getting here so quickly. How is she? Ethan asked, and Sarah was surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. Neutropenic fever, which is common during chemotherapy. If the blood cultures are negative and she responds to antibiotics, she should be fine. But if there's an actual infection... Sarah trailed off, not wanting to voice the possibilities that could arise from serious infection in an immunocompromised child. Ethan nodded gravely. What does the family need right now? Information they can understand, reassurance that this doesn't mean the treatment isn't working, and someone to advocate for them if decisions need to be made quickly. Sarah paused, looking back toward Lily's bed where Maria was sitting vigil. They need to know they're not facing this alone. Then that's what we'll provide, Ethan said simply. Something in his tone made Sarah look at him more carefully. You don't have to stay. I'm sure you have more important things. Dr. Mitchell, Ethan interrupted gently. 6 months before Amanda died, she spent 4 days in an emergency room with a young mother whose 2-year-old had been hit by a car. The mother didn't speak English, had no insurance, and was terrified that her son was going to die surrounded by strangers who couldn't understand her. He paused, his expression softening with memory. Amanda stayed with that family for 4 days. Translated for doctors, explained procedures, slept in waiting room chairs, and held that mother's hand when they weren't sure the little boy would survive. Did he make it? Sarah asked quietly. He did. Full recovery. Ethan's smile was sad but genuine. Amanda said it was the most important work she'd done that month, even though it wasn't technically part of her job description. Sarah felt something shift in her understanding of both Ethan and the foundation he had created in Amanda's memory. So this isn't just about pharmaceutical company philanthropy. This is about finishing the work Amanda started, Ethan said quietly. Making sure that families like the Chens have advocates who understand that medicine is fundamentally about human connection, not just clinical protocols. Before Sarah could respond, her pager buzzed with a message from the lab. Lily Chen blood cultures preliminary negative. Continue current antibiotic regimen. Relief flooded through Sarah's chest like warm water. Preliminary cultures are negative, she told Ethan. That means no obvious bacterial infection. She should be able to go home in a day or two. Good news. Very good news. Sarah looked toward Lily's bed, where the little girl was dozing fitfully while Maria maintained her vigil. I should go tell them. Dr. Mitchell, Ethan said as she started to walk away. When this crisis is over, when Lily is stable and back home, I'd like to show you something. Part of Amanda's research that I think you need to see. What kind of research? Documentation of cases like this one. Families forced to navigate medical emergencies without adequate support, children who get suboptimal care because their parents can't advocate effectively within the system. Ethan's expression grew more serious. Evidence that the problem is bigger than individual cases of compassionate physicians being punished for caring too much. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding that Ethan was offering her something larger than a consulting position or even a career change. He was offering her the chance to be part of systemic change that could prevent other families from facing the isolation and fear that had brought Maria Chen to the emergency room today. "I'd like to see that research," she said quietly. As Sarah walked back toward Lily's bedside to deliver the good news about her blood cultures, she realized that her transformation from suspended resident to healthcare advocate was accelerating in ways she hadn't anticipated. But for the first time since Dr. Blackwell had exiled her to academic purgatory, she felt like she was moving toward work that honored everything her mother had taught her about medicine. The question now was whether she was ready for the scope of the challenge Ethan Cross was preparing to show her. 3 days later, Lily Chen was discharged from the hospital with clear blood cultures, responsive antibiotic treatment, and detailed instructions for monitoring fever at home. Sarah sat in the Cross Foundation's Upper East Side office, reviewing the incident report she had written about communication barriers during pediatric oncology emergencies, when Ethan knocked on the doorframe of the small office he had assigned to her. "How's the family doing?" he asked, entering with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of relaxed demeanor that suggested he had nowhere more urgent to be. "Much better," Sarah replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Lily's fever broke completely yesterday, and Maria is feeling more confident about managing symptoms at home. Dr. Ramos said they handled the emergency exactly right, recognizing the warning signs and getting to the hospital quickly." "And how are you doing with the transition?" Sarah considered the question as she looked around her temporary office. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of paperwork, orientation meetings, and learning to navigate her new role as a Cross Foundation consultant. But it had also been the first time since starting her residency that she felt like her work was directly connected to improving individual patients' lives rather than satisfying institutional requirements. "It's different from what I expected," she said honestly. "More complex, but also more purposeful." Ethan nodded, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Amanda used to say that the most important medical work happened in the spaces between official protocols. The conversations that didn't get documented, the support that wasn't billable, the advocacy that prevented crises rather than treating them. Is that what I'm doing? Crisis prevention. Among other things." Ethan opened the portfolio he had brought with him and pulled out a thick folder. "I promised to show you Amanda's research. Are you ready for that?" Sarah felt a flicker of nervousness. "I think so." Ethan placed the folder on her desk and opened it to reveal a collection of case studies, statistical analyses, and patient interviews that represented years of meticulous documentation. Amanda spent her residency and fellowship documenting patterns of care disparities, he explained. Not just racial or ethnic disparities, but class-based differences in how patients were treated, how their symptoms were interpreted, how quickly they received appropriate interventions. Sarah began reading the first case study, a 43-year-old construction worker who had presented to the emergency room with chest pain and was discharged with anxiety medication because his symptoms didn't fit the classic presentation pattern and his appearance suggested drug-seeking behavior rather than cardiac emergency. He died of a massive heart attack 6 hours later in his apartment. "Jesus," Sarah whispered. "That's case number 1, Ethan said quietly. "There are 237 more in that folder." Sarah turned to the next case. A teenage mother whose complaints of severe abdominal pain were attributed to drug seeking until she collapsed in the waiting room from a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. Then a homeless veteran whose infected wound was treated with basic dressing changes until he developed sepsis that required amputation. Each case was documented with clinical precision, but Amanda's notes revealed the human stories behind the medical failures. Patients dismissed because they didn't communicate symptoms in ways that medical staff expected. Families whose concerns were ignored because they lacked the vocabulary to describe what they were observing. Children who received suboptimal care because their parents couldn't navigate insurance authorization processes quickly enough. How did she collect all this? Sarah asked, overwhelmed by the scope of the documentation. Emergency room shifts, ICU rounds, clinic rotations, Ethan explained. She started keeping detailed notes during her residency when she noticed patterns that weren't being discussed in morbidity and mortality conferences. Cases where the medical errors weren't technical mistakes but communication failures and bias-based assumptions. Sarah continued reading, noting Amanda's methodical approach to documenting not just what went wrong, but why it went wrong. Language barriers that prevented accurate history-taking. Cultural differences that led to misinterpretation of pain expressions. Socioeconomic factors that affected how seriously patients' complaints were taken by medical staff. "This is extraordinary work," Sarah said finally. "Why isn't this published? Why isn't this being used to change training protocols?" Ethan's expression grew darker. Because Amanda died before she could complete the analysis. And because the hospitals where she collected this data weren't particularly interested in documentation that could expose them to liability claims. So all this research just sits here? Until now. Ethan leaned forward, his voice taking on the intensity that Sarah had learned to recognize when he was discussing something that mattered deeply to him. Amanda's documentation proves that the problems you've experienced with the Chen family aren't isolated incidents. They're systematic patterns that affect thousands of families every year. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Families like Lily's. Exactly. Families who need medical advocates not just during crises, but throughout entire treatment protocols. People who fall through the gaps because the system assumes that everyone has the resources and knowledge to navigate complex medical bureaucracies independently. Sarah closed the folder, feeling overwhelmed by the implications of what Amanda had documented. "What are you proposing we do with this?" "Complete her research, update it with current cases, and use it to create intervention protocols that actually address the communication and advocacy barriers that lead to suboptimal outcomes." Ethan paused, studying Sarah's face. "I'm proposing that we turn this documentation into a systematic program that prevents families like the Chens from facing medical emergencies alone and unprepared." The scope of the project was breathtaking. Sarah could see how Amanda's research could become the foundation for comprehensive changes in how hospitals approached patient advocacy, cultural competency, and family support during medical crises. But she could also see how much work would be required to translate academic documentation into practical intervention programs. "This would be more than consulting," she said slowly. "This would be designing and implementing new models of patient care." "Yes," Ethan agreed. "It would. And you want me to lead this project?" "I want you to finish what Amanda started," Ethan said quietly. "Because you understand both the clinical side and the human cost of communication failures. You've experienced what it's like to be punished by the medical establishment for caring too much about individual patients. And you have the credibility to design interventions that actually work rather than interventions that sound good in committee meetings." Sarah felt the weight of the opportunity settling on her shoulders. It was larger than anything she had imagined when she first met Ethan Cross in the hospital coffee shop. It was the chance to transform her experience with Lily Chen into systematic change that could help thousands of families facing similar crises. But it was also a complete departure from the traditional medical career she had worked so hard to achieve. "If I accept this," she said carefully, "what happens to my residency training?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "That would be your choice," he said finally. "You could complete your residency and then join the foundation full-time. Or you could take a leave of absence and return to clinical training after establishing the program. Or..." He paused. "You could decide that the work we're discussing is more important than completing a residency program that has already demonstrated its incompatibility with your priorities." The last option hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah had spent years working toward the goal of becoming a practicing physician, but her experience with Dr. Blackwell had shown her how the medical establishment could crush the very qualities that made physicians effective advocates for vulnerable patients. "I need time to think about this," Sarah said finally. Of course, Ethan agreed, rising from his chair. But while you're thinking, there's something else I'd like you to consider. What's that? Amanda believed that the most important medical breakthroughs didn't happen in laboratories or operating rooms. They happened when someone had the courage to challenge systems that prioritized institutional protection over individual patient welfare. Ethan paused at the doorway. She would have said that what you did for Lily Chen, risking your career to keep a promise to a frightened child, was the most important kind of medical practice. After he left, Sarah sat alone in her office, staring at Amanda's research and thinking about the choice that was crystallizing in front of her. She could return to her residency training and hope to eventually become the kind of physician who worked within the system to help individual patients. Or she could step outside the traditional medical hierarchy and work to change the system itself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria Chen. Lily drew another picture for Dr. Sarah. Says she wants to be a doctor like you when she grows up. Sarah smiled despite the complexity of her situation. A 6-year-old girl wanted to become a doctor because someone had shown her that medicine was fundamentally about human connection rather than institutional compliance. It was exactly the kind of inspiration that Amanda Ross would have understood, and exactly the kind of responsibility that required Sarah to choose carefully what kind of physician she wanted to become. 2 weeks into her work with the Cross Foundation, Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of having a job she actually loved. Her days were spent reviewing Amanda's research, developing intervention protocols, and consulting with families navigating complex medical situations. But it was the evening visits with Lily Chen that remained the most meaningful part of her new routine. She arrived at the Chen apartment in Queens on a Thursday evening, carrying a bag of books and the kind of medical supplies that helped transform intimidating treatment protocols into manageable daily routines. Maria greeted her at the door with the warm smile of someone who no longer felt like she was fighting alone. "Dr. Sarah," Lily called from the living room, where she was curled up on the couch with her stuffed rabbit, looking pale but alert. "I finished the book you brought me." Sarah settled beside Lily on the couch, automatically assessing the child's appearance while keeping her expression cheerful. "Which book was that, sweetheart?" "The one about the little girl who becomes a scientist," Lily said proudly. "She reminds me of you, except she studies bugs instead of sick people." Sarah laughed, feeling the familiar warmth that came from Lily's innocent observations. "Scientists and doctors are similar in some ways. We both try to solve puzzles and help people understand complicated things." "Is that what you're doing with your new job?" Lily asked with the precocious curiosity that serious illness sometimes brought to children. "Mama says you're not working at the hospital anymore." Sarah glanced at Maria, who was preparing medication doses in the kitchen with movements that had become routine over the past month. They had developed an efficient evening routine. Sarah would visit to check on Lily's progress and help Maria review any new medical instructions, while Lily practiced the kind of normal childhood interactions that chemotherapy often interrupted. "I'm still helping sick people," Sarah explained carefully. "But now I work with families to make sure they understand what their doctors are telling them and that they have help when medical situations get scary. Like when I had the fever and had to go to the emergency room?" "Exactly like that," Sarah confirmed. "Sometimes families need someone who can explain what's happening and help them ask the right questions." Lily nodded seriously, as though this explanation made perfect sense to her 6-year-old logic. "Mr. Ethan helps with that too, right?" Sarah felt a small jolt of surprise. "You've met Mr. Ethan?" "He came to visit when you were in meetings," Lily said matter-of-factly. "He brought books in Spanish for Mama and he knows how to draw really good animals." Sarah looked toward Maria for confirmation. "Ethan cross-visited here?" "Last week," Maria said, bringing Lily's evening medications over to the couch. "He said he wanted to check on how the family support services were working from our perspective. Very nice man, very respectful." She paused, giving Sarah a meaningful look. He cares about you very much." The observation made Sarah feel unexpectedly self-conscious. Over the past 2 weeks, she had developed a working relationship with Ethan that felt more like partnership than supervision. He consulted with her on foundation projects, respected her clinical judgment, and seemed genuinely interested in her perspective on healthcare advocacy. But she hadn't considered how their professional collaboration might appear to outside observers. "We work well together," Sarah said carefully. "Mama thinks he likes you," Lily announced with the devastating honesty that only children possessed. "She says he looks at you the way Papa used to look at her pictures." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Maria had rarely mentioned Lily's father, who had apparently left when Lily was diagnosed and never returned. "Lily, Mr. Ethan and I are colleagues. We work together to help families like yours." "But you could be friends too, right?" Lily pressed. "Like how you and Mama are friends now, but you're also my doctor?" The question touched on something Sarah had been trying not to examine too closely. Her relationship with Ethan had evolved beyond simple professional collaboration, but she wasn't sure how to categorize what was developing between them. He was brilliant, compassionate, and committed to work that mattered deeply to both of them. But he was also grieving the loss of someone he had clearly loved completely, and Sarah wasn't sure there was space in his emotional landscape for anything beyond the shared mission they had inherited from Amanda. "Sometimes people who work together become good friends," Sarah said diplomatically. "But the most important thing is helping families like yours get the best possible medical care." Lily seemed satisfied with this explanation, and the conversation moved on to her latest drawings and plans for when she would be healthy enough to return to school. But as Sarah helped Maria organize the next day's medication schedule, she found herself thinking about Ethan's unexpected visit to the Chen home. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "How is Lily doing tonight? Any concerns from today's clinic visit?" Sarah typed back, "All good. White count improving, no new symptoms. Lily mentioned you visited last week." The response came quickly. "Hope that was all right. Wanted to see how our support services looked from the family's perspective." "Of course it's all right. Though apparently you're quite the artist." "Lily is a demanding art critic. Had to up my game." The casual exchange made Sarah smile despite herself. There was something appealing about imagining Ethan Cross, pharmaceutical CEO and foundation director, sitting on the Chen family's modest couch drawing animals for a 6-year-old girl with cancer. After completing her visit with Lily and Maria, Sarah took the subway back to Manhattan, thinking about the conversation and what it revealed about the man she was working with. By the time she reached the Upper East Side, she had made a decision that surprised her with its spontaneity. Instead of heading home to her apartment, she walked to the Cross Foundation brownstone, noting that lights were still on in the office windows despite the late hour. She used her new keycard to enter the building and climbed the stairs to find Ethan in the main conference room, surrounded by spreadsheets and looking like he had been there for hours. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, looking up with surprise and what might have been pleasure. "I wasn't expecting you tonight." "I was thinking about Amanda's research," Sarah said, which was partially true, "and about how to structure the intervention protocols we discussed." At 9:30 on a Thursday night? Sarah felt suddenly self-conscious about her impulse visit. "I was in the neighborhood after visiting the Chens. But if you're busy I can, please stay," Ethan said quickly, clearing space at the conference table. "I could use the company. I've been staring at budget projections for the past 3 hours." Sarah sat down across from him, noting the tired lines around his eyes and the loosened tie that suggested he had been working since early morning. "Do you always work this late?" "More often than I should," Ethan admitted. "Old habit from the years after Amanda died. Work was easier than dealing with everything else." The honest admission created a moment of intimacy that felt different from their usual professional discussions. Sarah found herself studying his face, noting the way grief had etched itself into the corners of his expression even when he smiled. "Is it getting easier?" she asked quietly. The grief. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the careful attention he gave to most serious topics. Different, he said finally. Less overwhelming, but more integrated, I suppose. It's part of who I am now rather than something that's happening to me. That sounds healthy. It sounds like 4 years of therapy, Ethan said with a self-deprecating smile. Though I have to admit, working on Amanda's research with you has felt more healing than anything else I've tried. The confession made Sarah's pulse quicken slightly. Because you're finishing her work? Because I'm working with someone who understands what she was trying to accomplish, Ethan said, his voice growing more serious. Someone who shares her priorities about what medicine should be versus what it actually is. Sarah felt the weight of the compliment, but also the responsibility it carried. I'm not trying to replace her, Ethan. I know that, he said quickly. And I'm not trying to find a replacement for her. What I'm trying to find is... He paused, seeming to search for the right words. Partnership, I suppose. Someone who cares about this work as much as I do, and who brings skills and perspectives that complement what I'm able to contribute. The way he said partnership made Sarah wonder if he was talking about more than just professional collaboration. But before she could analyze his tone, her phone rang with an emergency call from Maria Chen. Dr. Sarah? Maria's voice was tight with controlled panic. Lily's fever is back, and she's saying her head hurts badly. Should I take her to the emergency room? Sarah was on her feet immediately, her medical training overriding every other consideration. How high is the fever? When did it start? 101.2 and about an hour ago. But the headache is what scares me. She's never complained of headaches before. Sarah felt ice water flood her veins. Headache combined with fever in an immunocompromised child could indicate meningitis or other serious infections that required immediate intervention. Take her to Presbyterian Medical Center emergency room right now, Sarah said firmly. Don't wait, don't call the on-call service. Just go directly to the ER and tell them you have a pediatric oncology patient with fever and headache. Okay, Maria said, her voice shaking. Will you meet us there? I'm on my way, Sarah promised, already reaching for her jacket. Ethan was standing by the time she ended the call. Emergency. Lily has fever and headache. Could be nothing but in an immunocompromised child. Sarah trailed off, not needing to explain the possibilities to someone who understood medical complications. I'll drive, Ethan said immediately, grabbing his keys from the conference table. You don't have to, Sarah. The way he said her name made her stop. Lily matters to me too. Let's go. As they rushed toward the garage where Ethan kept his car, Sarah realized that somewhere over the past month, she had stopped thinking of Ethan Cross as a pharmaceutical executive doing charitable work and started thinking of him as a partner in the truest sense of the word. Someone who understood that the most important work happened when frightened families needed advocates in the middle of medical crises. And as they drove through the Manhattan streets toward what might be another life-threatening emergency, Sarah found herself grateful that she wouldn't be facing it alone. The emergency room at Presbyterian Medical Center at 10:30 p.m. was a different beast than the controlled chaos of daytime operations. The lighting felt harsher, the staff moved with the focused urgency of skeleton crews managing too many crises, and the waiting area held the particular tension of families dealing with medical emergencies that couldn't wait until morning. Sarah and Ethan found Maria Chen in the pediatric bay, holding Lily's hand while nurses prepared for what looked like a lumbar puncture procedure. Dr. Ramos was reviewing orders with a resident, her expression carrying the careful neutrality that emergency physicians wore when they were preparing for potentially serious diagnoses. How is she? Sarah asked Maria quietly. Fever went up to 102.5 in the ambulance, Maria whispered. And the headache got worse. She kept asking for you. Sarah looked at Lily, who was awake but clearly uncomfortable, her small face flushed with fever and her usual bright energy replaced by the listless quality of significant illness. When Lily saw Sarah, she managed a weak smile. "Dr. Sarah," Lily whispered. "My head hurts really bad. Are the doctors going to fix it?" "They're going to do some tests to figure out what's causing the headache," Sarah said gently, taking Lily's free hand. "It might be uncomfortable for a few minutes, but it will help them know exactly how to help you feel better." Dr. Ramos approached the bedside with the kind of expression that suggested difficult conversations ahead. "Dr. Mitchell," she said formally, acknowledging Sarah's consulting role. "I'm sure you understand why we need to rule out CNS infection in this scenario." Sarah nodded, translating the medical terminology mentally. Central nervous system infection, meningitis, was exactly the complication every oncology team feared in immunocompromised patients. "What are you seeing on exam?" "Positive Koenig sign, photophobia, and the combination of fever with severe headache in a neutropenic patient," Dr. Ramos said quietly. "I've called for emergent lumbar puncture, and we're starting empiric antibiotics immediately." The clinical picture was ominous, and Sarah felt her stomach drop with professional understanding of what those symptoms might mean. But she kept her expression calm for Lily's benefit, focusing on the child's immediate comfort rather than the terrifying possibilities that the spinal tap might reveal. "Lily," Sarah said softly, "the doctors need to take a small sample of fluid from near your spine to test it and make sure there aren't any germs that shouldn't be there. It will feel like a pinch, but I'll be right here with you the whole time." "Will Mr. Ethan stay too?" Lily asked, looking toward Ethan with the trust that children extended to adults who had proven themselves reliable. "If the doctors say it's okay," Ethan said gently, glancing at Dr. Ramos for permission. "Family and support personnel can remain during the procedure," Dr. Ramos confirmed. "But I need everyone to understand that we're treating this as a potential medical emergency. If the cerebrospinal fluid shows evidence of bacterial meningitis, Lily will need immediate intensive care management." Maria made a small, choked sound at hearing her worst fears given clinical names. "Is she going to die?" Dr. Ramos's expression softened with the kind of compassion that emergency physicians developed for desperate parents facing unthinkable possibilities. "We're taking every precaution to ensure the best possible outcome," she said carefully. "The antibiotics we're starting will treat bacterial infections, and we have excellent protocols for managing complications in pediatric oncology patients." It was a professional way of saying that Lily's survival would depend on factors they wouldn't understand until the lab results were available. Sarah watched Maria struggle to process information that might determine whether her 6-year-old daughter lived or died, and felt the familiar rage at medical systems that forced families to navigate life-threatening crises with inadequate emotional support. The lumbar puncture procedure took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Lily was remarkably brave, holding Sarah's hand and listening to Ethan tell elaborate stories about brave princesses who fought dragons with magic medicines. But when the procedure was complete and they were waiting for initial lab results, Lily fell into an exhausted sleep that left the adults to face the possibility of bacterial meningitis in whispered conversations. "How long for results?" Sarah asked Dr. Ramos. "Preliminary cell count and protein levels within an hour," Dr. Ramos replied. "Culture and sensitivity will take 24 to 48 hours, but the initial results should tell us whether we're dealing with bacterial infection." Sarah nodded, understanding that the next hour would determine whether Lily faced weeks of intensive care treatment or a simple course of antibiotics for viral illness. She looked at Maria, who was maintaining vigil beside Lily's bed with the exhausted determination of mothers whose children were fighting for their lives. Ethan touched Sarah's arm gently. "Can I talk to you privately for a moment?" Sarah followed him to a quiet corner of the emergency bay, bracing herself for difficult news about cross-foundation protocols or insurance authorization issues that might complicate Lily's care. Instead, Ethan's first words surprised her completely. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically. "I'm worried about Lily, but, Sarah?" The way he said her name made her stop and actually consider the question. You've been advocating for this family for over a month. You've risked your career, changed your entire professional trajectory, and now you're facing the possibility that a child you care about might have a life-threatening infection. That's not nothing. The observation hit her with unexpected force. She had been so focused on Lily's medical needs and Maria's emotional support that she hadn't acknowledged the toll that constant advocacy took on the advocate. "I knew what I was signing up for," she said quietly. "Did you? Because I don't think anyone can really prepare for what it feels like to care this much about individual patients." Ethan's voice carried the weight of personal experience. Amanda used to say that the hardest part of being a physician wasn't dealing with medical complications, it was learning to carry the emotional weight of other people's suffering without being destroyed by it. Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time since the emergency had begun. How did she do it? How did Amanda manage to care so much without falling apart? "She didn't always manage it," Ethan said honestly. "There were nights when she came home from the hospital crying about patients she couldn't save or families she couldn't help enough. But she also said that learning to carry that grief was part of becoming the kind of physician who could make a real difference." Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Ramos approached with a tablet displaying lab results and an expression that made Sarah's heart skip. "Preliminary CSF results are back," Dr. Ramos said. "Good news. No evidence of bacterial meningitis. Elevated white cells suggest viral infection, which should respond well to supportive care and monitoring." The relief that flooded through Sarah was so intense it made her knees weak. "So she's going to be okay? She'll need monitoring for the next 24 hours, and we'll continue antiviral medications, but yes, this looks like something we can manage with standard protocols," Dr. Ramos confirmed. "She should be able to go home in a day or two." Sarah felt Ethan's hand steady her as the adrenaline of the past several hours began to dissipate. But it wasn't until Maria Chen hugged her with tears of gratitude and relief that Sarah fully understood what Ethan had been trying to tell her. This was what it meant to practice medicine as human connection rather than clinical detachment. It meant carrying the weight of other people's love and fear and hope, knowing that sometimes you would be powerless to prevent loss but that showing up mattered anyway. And as she watched Ethan gently explain the test results to Lily in terms a 6-year-old could understand, Sarah realized that she had found someone who shared not just her professional values but her willingness to carry the emotional complexity of healing work. It was the beginning of something that felt like love, built on the foundation of shared commitment to work that mattered more than career advancement or personal comfort. But it was also the recognition that love between two people dedicated to advocacy work would require its own kind of courage. The willingness to support each other through the weight of caring too much about people who desperately needed advocate. 3 months after Lily Chen's meningitis scare, Sarah stood in the Cross Foundation conference room presenting her completed analysis of Amanda's research to a group of hospital administrators, insurance executives, and healthcare policy advocates. The presentation represented 18 months of work. Amanda's original documentation combined with Sarah's intervention protocols and outcome data from pilot programs at 3 major medical centers. Patient advocacy liaison programs reduced emergency department readmissions by 37%, Sarah explained, clicking to the next slide that showed statistical improvements across multiple metrics. More importantly, family satisfaction scores increased significantly when cultural and communication barriers were addressed proactively rather than reactively. She looked around the room, noting the mix of genuine interest and bureaucratic skepticism that characterized healthcare policy discussions. But her attention was drawn to Ethan, who sat at the back of the room with an expression of quiet pride that made her chest warm with more than professional satisfaction. Dr. Mitchell interrupted Dr. Elizabeth Santos, who had attended the presentation as Presbyterian Medical Center's representative. "These results are impressive, but I'm curious about scalability. How do you envision implementing this model across multiple hospital systems without prohibitive cost increases?" Sarah had anticipated the question. The pilot data suggests that advocacy liaisons actually reduce overall costs by preventing medical errors, improving treatment adherence, and reducing the need for crisis interventions. The upfront investment in communication support pays for itself through improved outcomes and reduced emergency utilization. The questions continued for another hour, ranging from technical implementation details to insurance reimbursement mechanisms. By the time the presentation concluded, Sarah felt drained but hopeful. The data was compelling, the pilot programs had demonstrated measurable success, and several hospital systems had expressed interest in expanding the advocacy liaison model. As the room emptied, Ethan approached with the kind of smile that suggested he had good news to share. "That was extraordinary," he said quietly. "Amanda would have been so proud of what you've accomplished with her research." "We've accomplished," Sarah corrected gently. "I couldn't have done any of this without the Foundation's support." "Maybe," Ethan agreed. "But the vision for how to translate academic research into practical interventions, that was all you." He paused, studying her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you." Before he could continue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Lily Chen. "Lily's scans came back clean. No evidence of disease. Dr. Ramos says she's officially in remission." Sarah stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words fully registered. Lily Chen, the 6-year-old girl who had asked for Elena's daughter during her darkest moments, was cancer-free. "Good news?" Ethan asked, noting her expression. "The best news," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Lily is in remission." Ethan's face lit up with genuine joy. "That's incredible. How do you feel?" Sarah considered the question, trying to identify the complex emotions swirling in her chest. Relief, certainly, and professional satisfaction at successful treatment outcomes. But underneath those expected responses was something deeper, a sense of completion, as though a promise made to a frightened child had finally been fulfilled completely. "Grateful," she said finally, "and proud that we were able to support her family through the entire treatment protocol." "You did more than support them, Sarah. You changed the trajectory of their experience with the healthcare system." Ethan's voice carried the kind of intensity that suggested he was building toward something important. "Which brings me to what I wanted to discuss with you." Sarah looked at him expectantly, noting the slight nervousness in his demeanor that seemed out of character for someone who navigated corporate boardrooms with such confidence. "The board of directors has approved funding for a national expansion of the patient advocacy program," Ethan began. "We're looking at implementing Amanda's protocols in 15 hospital systems over the next 2 years." "That's amazing," Sarah said, feeling excitement build at the scope of the opportunity. "How many families could we potentially help?" "Thousands," Ethan said simply. "But the program needs a director. Someone with clinical experience, research credentials, and demonstrated ability to bridge the gap between academic healthcare policy and practical family advocacy." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she understood where the conversation was heading. "Are you offering me the position?" "I'm offering you the chance to build something that could fundamentally change how families experience serious medical crises," Ethan said. "The position would come with significant autonomy, substantial funding, and the opportunity to hire your own staff and design implementation protocols." The offer was everything Sarah had dreamed of when she first started working with the Cross Foundation: meaningful work at a national scale, the chance to translate Amanda's research into systematic change, and the resources to make a real difference for families like the Chens. But it was also a permanent departure from traditional medical practice, the final step away from the residency training she had worked so hard to achieve. "What about my medical training?" she asked quietly. "I never finished my residency." "You've been practicing medicine in the most important sense for the past 1.5 years, Ethan said gently. "Advocating for families, ensuring appropriate care, preventing medical errors through improved communication. The fact that it doesn't fit traditional career categories doesn't make it less valuable. Sarah looked around the conference room where she had just presented evidence that non-traditional approaches to patient care could save lives and improve outcomes. Everything she had accomplished over the past 18 months had happened outside the rigid hierarchy that had punished her for caring too much about individual patients. "There's something else," Ethan continued, and his voice took on a different quality that made Sarah look at him more sharply. "Something personal I need to tell you before you make this decision." Sarah felt her heart skip, sensing that they were approaching territory they had been circling carefully for months. "I'm in love with you," Ethan said quietly, the words carrying the weight of careful consideration rather than impulsive confession. "Not because you remind me of Amanda, not because of the work we've done together, but because of who you are. Your courage, your compassion, your refusal to accept that suffering is inevitable just because it's institutionalized." The confession hit Sarah with surprising force, not because it was unexpected but because hearing it spoken aloud made her acknowledge feelings she had been keeping carefully compartmentalized. "Ethan," she began, but he continued before she could respond. "I'm not telling you this to influence your professional decision," he said quickly. "The job offer stands regardless of your personal feelings about me. But I needed you to know before you choose what kind of future you want to build." Sarah studied his face, noting the vulnerability in his expression and the careful distance he was maintaining despite his confession. He was offering her professional opportunity and personal love as separate choices, refusing to use one to manipulate the other. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "That I loved you?" "Since the night we rushed to the hospital when Lily had meningitis," Ethan said honestly. "Watching you advocate for her family, seeing how you carried the weight of their fear while maintaining hope, I realized I had fallen in love with someone who understood that the most important work requires the courage to care completely about people who have no one else to fight for them." Sarah felt tears threatening as she recognized the truth in his words. Somewhere between advocating for Lily Chen and building intervention protocols from Amanda's research, she had fallen in love with a man who shared her commitment to work that mattered more than professional advancement or personal comfort. "I love you too," she said quietly, and watched relief flood across his features. "Even though I'm complicated and grieving and probably not the easiest person to build a life with?" "Because you're complicated and grieving and committed to work that requires everything we have to give," Sarah corrected gently. "Because you understand that love between two people dedicated to advocacy work means supporting each other through the weight of caring too much." Ethan stepped closer, and Sarah felt the careful distance they had maintained for months dissolving into something warmer and more immediate. "So what do you say, Dr. Mitchell?" he asked softly. "Are you ready to build a program that could change how thousands of families experience medical crises? Are you ready to build a life with someone who will never ask you to choose between love and meaningful work?" Sarah looked at this man who had offered her professional opportunity, emotional partnership, and the chance to honor everything her mother had taught her about medicine as human connection rather than institutional compliance. "Yes," she said quietly. "To all of it." When Ethan kissed her, gentle and careful and full of promise, Sarah realized that she had found something she hadn't known she was looking for, a partnership built on shared values, mutual respect, and the understanding that the most important love supported rather than competed with the work that defined them both. It was exactly the kind of future Amanda Ross would have wanted for the research she had died trying to complete. And exactly the kind of love Elena Mitchell would have wanted for the daughter she had raised to fight for people who had no one else to advocate for them. 2 years later, the pediatric oncology ward at Presbyterian Medical Center buzzed with the kind of controlled energy that characterized successful medical programs operating at full capacity. Sarah walked through the familiar corridors, noting the changes that had been implemented as part of the National Patient Advocacy Initiative: multilingual signage, family consultation rooms designed for comfort rather than intimidation, and staff badges that clearly identified cultural liaisons and communication specialists. She stopped at the nurses' station to check in with Dr. Patricia Ramos, who looked up from patient charts with the satisfied expression of someone whose professional life had become measurably easier. "Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Ramos said with genuine warmth. "Perfect timing. I wanted to update you on the Chen family consultation from last week." "New family?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair beside Dr. Ramos's desk. 7-year-old boy with all, family recently immigrated from El Salvador. Spanish-speaking parents, no extended family support, father working 2 jobs and terrified about missing work for treatment appointments. Dr. Ramos pulled up the consultation notes on her tablet. "Your advocacy liaison team arranged employer communication, transportation assistance, and cultural support. The family went from overwhelmed and considering treatment delays to fully engaged with the protocol in less than a week." Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction that came from systematic solutions to individual crises. Over the past 2 years, the patient advocacy program had expanded to 43 hospital systems across the country, providing support for over 8,000 families navigating complex medical situations. Each success story represented not just improved clinical outcomes, but prevented trauma for families who might otherwise have faced medical crises alone and unprepared. "How are the staff adapting to the liaison model?" Sarah asked. "Better than I expected," Dr. Ramos admitted. "The residents especially appreciate having someone to help with complex family dynamics and communication barriers. It allows them to focus on clinical medicine rather than trying to be social workers, translators, and therapists simultaneously." The observation made Sarah think about Dr. Richard Blackwell, who had left Presbyterian Medical Center 6 months earlier for a position at a smaller hospital that prized traditional hierarchical medicine over patient advocacy innovations. His departure had felt less like victory than like inevitable evolution, the medical establishment slowly adapting to recognize that excellent patient care required more than clinical competence. "Speaking of residents," Dr. Ramos continued, "we have 2 internal medicine residents who are interested in advocacy liaison training. Would your program consider them for the summer fellowship?" "Send me their applications," Sarah said immediately. "We're always looking for clinicians who understand that medicine is fundamentally about human connection." After completing her consultation with Dr. Ramos, Sarah made her way to room 615, the same room where Lily Chen had fought her battle against leukemia 2 years earlier. The current occupant was a 4-year-old girl with neuroblastoma, whose family had specifically requested advocacy liaison support after hearing about the program from other families in their cultural community. But first, Sarah had a promise to keep. She took the elevator to the hospital's main lobby, where Lily Chen was waiting with Maria beside the coffee shop where Sarah had first met Ethan Cross. Lily looked nothing like the pale, frightened child Sarah had met during that first consultation. She was taller, healthier, and radiating the kind of boundless energy that characterized successful pediatric cancer survivors. "Dr. Sarah," Lily called, running over with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old who had been anticipating this meeting for weeks. "Are you ready for our presentation?" "Absolutely," Sarah said, hugging Lily with the careful affection of someone who had supported this child through the most frightening experience of her young life. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Lily admitted. "But Mama says that feeling nervous about important things means you care about doing them right." Sarah glanced at Maria, who smiled with the quiet confidence of a woman whose daughter was not only surviving but thriving. Over the past 2 years, Maria had become an informal advocate for other Spanish-speaking families navigating pediatric oncology treatment, translating her own experience into support for parents facing similar crises. "Ready to change some minds?" Sarah asked. "Ready to help more kids like me," Lily said with the matter-of-fact determination that had carried her through 18 months of chemotherapy. They took the elevator to the 8th floor, where the hospital's board of directors was meeting to review funding proposals for the coming year. Sarah had been invited to present an evaluation of the patient advocacy program's impact, but she had asked for permission to bring a special consultant, a former patient who could speak to the program's effectiveness from the family's perspective. The boardroom was filled with the usual mix of hospital administrators, community leaders, and healthcare executives who made funding decisions that affected thousands of patients and families. But when Lily Chen walked to the front of the room with her small presentation folder, the atmosphere shifted to something more personal and immediate. "My name is Lily Chen," she began, reading from carefully prepared notes with occasional glances at Sarah for encouragement. "2 years ago, I had cancer and was very sick. My mama and I were scared because we didn't understand what the doctors were telling us, and we didn't have family to help us." The room was completely silent as Lily described her experience with chemotherapy, emergency hospitalizations, and the fear that came from navigating complex medical situations without adequate support. But her presentation focused not on the difficulty of cancer treatment, but on how advocacy liaison services had transformed her family's experience. "Dr. Sarah helped my mama understand what was happening to me," Lily continued. "She came to the hospital when I was scared, she helped us talk to other doctors, and she made sure we knew we weren't alone. Because of Dr. Sarah and Mr. Ethan and all the people who helped us, I got better and my mama wasn't scared all the time." When Lily finished her presentation, the questions from board members were gentle but penetrating. How had advocacy liaison support affected her treatment compliance? Did family communication improve when cultural barriers were addressed proactively? What would have happened if those services hadn't been available? Lily answered each question with the straightforward honesty that only children possessed, describing complex medical experiences in terms that made abstract policy discussions suddenly human and immediate. "Dr. Sarah saved my life," Lily concluded simply. "Not just because she helped me get better medicine, but because she made sure my family knew how to help me be brave." After Lily's presentation, the board voted unanimously to expand funding for the patient advocacy program, ensuring its continuation for another 3 years. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came when Dr. Elizabeth Santos approached after the meeting with an unexpected proposal. "Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Santos said quietly, "the hospital would like to offer you a permanent position as Director of Patient Advocacy Services. Full medical staff privileges, department budget authority, and the opportunity to train other hospitals in implementing your protocols." The offer represented a kind of institutional recognition that Sarah had never expected, the medical establishment acknowledging that patient advocacy was legitimate medical practice deserving of professional respect and resources. "It's a generous offer," Sarah said carefully. "But I should mention that my work with the Cross Foundation requires significant travel for program implementation at other hospital systems." "We understand," Dr. Santos said with a slight smile. "We're prepared to offer a flexible arrangement that allows you to continue your national work while maintaining a base here at Presbyterian. Consider it our investment in keeping innovative medical practice in our system." That evening, Sarah met Ethan at the Cross Foundation brownstone to celebrate both Lily's successful presentation and the unexpected job offer from Presbyterian Medical Center. They sat in the garden behind the building, sharing Chinese takeout and discussing the day's developments with the comfortable ease of two people who had learned to balance professional collaboration with personal intimacy. "How do you feel about Dr. Santos's offer?" Ethan asked, refilling Sarah's wine glass with movements that had become routine over the months they had been living together. "Surprised," Sarah admitted. 2 years ago, Blackwell suspended me for caring too much about individual patients. Now the same institution wants to pay me to systematize that approach to patient care. People change. Institutions change. Sometimes it just takes longer than we'd like," Ethan observed gently. "The question is whether the position would allow you to do the work you're passionate about." Sarah considered the question, thinking about the families she had supported over the past 2 years and the systematic changes that had emerged from Amanda's research. I think it would, especially if I can continue the national program development work. Then it sounds like you've found a way to practice medicine that honors everything your mother taught you about caring for people who need advocates, Ethan said quietly. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Lily Chen. Thank you for teaching me that doctors can be friends too. When I grow up, I want to help scared kids just like you helped me. Sarah showed the message to Ethan, feeling the familiar warmth that came from knowing her work had made a difference in individual lives while contributing to systematic change. Amanda would have loved her, Ethan said softly, reading the message over Sarah's shoulder. I think she would have loved all of this, Sarah agreed, gesturing toward the foundation office where Amanda's research had been transformed into national policy. The programs, the families we've helped, the proof that medicine can be both scientifically rigorous and fundamentally compassionate. As the sun set over the brownstones garden, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from suspended resident to national advocate for patient-centered medical care. It hadn't been the career path she had planned when she started medical school, but it had become something more meaningful than she had ever imagined possible. 6 months later, when Ethan proposed marriage in the same garden where they had celebrated Lily's remission, Sarah's answer was immediate and complete. They were building a life together based on shared commitment to work that mattered, mutual support through the challenges of advocacy, and the understanding that the most important love amplified rather than competed with professional purpose. Their wedding was small and intimate, held in the Cross Foundation conference room where they had spent countless hours planning interventions that would help families navigate medical crises with dignity and support. Lily Chen served as flower girl, scattering petals while wearing a small white dress that made her look every inch the healthy, vibrant child she had become. Dr. Patricia Ramos officiated the ceremony, reading vows that Sarah and Ethan had written about partnership in service of something larger than themselves. And Maria Chen gave a blessing in Spanish that translated roughly to, "May your love always make other people's burdens lighter to carry." It was exactly the kind of marriage Elena Mitchell would have wanted for her daughter, built on the foundation of shared values, mutual respect, and the understanding that the most important work required everything they had to give. And it was exactly the kind of future Amanda Ross would have envisioned for her research, transformed into systematic change that prevented other families from facing medical crises alone and unprepared. As Sarah and Ethan danced to their first song as husband and wife, surrounded by colleagues, friends, and families whose lives had been touched by the patient advocacy program, Sarah realized that she had found something she hadn't known she was searching for. She had found a way to practice medicine that honored both scientific rigor and human compassion. She had found love with someone who shared her commitment to work that mattered more than career advancement. And she had found proof that individual acts of courage, keeping promises to frighten children, advocating for families who had no other voice, could grow into systematic change that transformed how entire institutions approached the art of healing. It was, Sarah thought as Ethan spun her around the makeshift dance floor, exactly what her mother had meant when she said that the most important medicine sometimes wasn't pills or procedures. It was just showing up, just letting someone know they mattered enough to fight for. And it was exactly the kind of future worth building, one family at a time. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please follow the channel for more.